If fantabulous. I'm here with the chiseled jaw, masculine, alpha male, night beast, blonde, blue-eyed, super Anglo-Saxon monster Jesus, James P Dowling, and we're here to talk about soy boys and Carl Jung's opinion on the deep soy conspiracy to try turn men into cucks. James, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling fantastic. This is very important. All this information about Carl Jung and his hatred of the deep soy conspiracy, it's very important. It's been suppressed by the deep state for a very long time. So they're actually going to release this to you. So I hope this is very valuable to you and you stop taking xenoestrogens in your diet.
Like, the reason why we waited until number 7 is because we follow Gary the numbers guy. We're very into numerology, and we were like, number 7 is the one we're going to drop the real red pill in Carl Jung. Carl Jung wasn't a psychologist. He was an anti-soy theorist, and he has put it very, very clearly that soy is ruining the world. So we're here to wake you up. We're here with the book. It's Aion. Once you get to page 17, it just all changes. It's just all about soy. It's like no collective unconscious.
Can I quickly say as well, for all the Americans watching, that's something called sarcasm, which is very popular over in Europe. So if you've lasted this long, thank you. I appreciate
you. Good sir. Today we are going to hopefully close off the Anima and Anima section, though I will not rush it because this is such powerful and interesting stuff. It's very, very deep and difficult, and I actually would love to get into this more in a more serious way because I think this is just the bomb. I love talking about this stuff. Very, very, very deep. But we're going to talk about the end point here where we get more into the idea of projection and how these symbols relate to the collective unconscious. Now, a few notes that I did last night really allowed me to codify different words we can use to talk about anima and animus. And anima, I think, is a good way to represent what we could call eros, and animus is a good way to represent what we could call logos. And what's interesting about these is Nietzsche also has a theory where he says that there's an Apollyon, or a logos, or an animus, a masculine, a wordy side of life, and there's a Dionysian, an experience, a felt, and an emotional side of life as well, and that's almost like the yin and the yang, and also the feminine and the masculine. You're really getting into this idea of the anima and the animus when you're going for the duality. You're going to the dividing line between two fundamental forces of reality, order and chaos, as Jordan Peterson talks about them. And so the logos is very much the wordy speech, masculine, ordered side of things. The eros is very much the fiery, emotional, feminine side of things. And what's so interesting is that men are built in a more logo-centered way. They're very much like about words and objects and theories and all that. And women are far more emotional. And Jung is proposing in this, obviously, that their psychic development depends on them bringing the men bringing to life their opposite, and their opposite being the fiery, emotional side of things. And they have to develop their courage, and they have to develop their ability to deal with fear in order to beat the dragon and take the girl and succeed and get all the gold. And then it's the same with the women. The women need to model a strong man and understand that they can't just give themselves away to anybody. They need to have standards and boundaries and strictness and rigidness and whatnot. So it's a very, very interesting, very, very interesting dynamic he's striking up there. And this is where we start to see these images become more universal. I guess what Jung is trying to say is that if you can imagine in the collective, there's these two powerful forces that are yin and yang. You can never just stare into the invisible world of the imagination and see these two powerful forces as they actually are, the yin and yang, the god and the goddess. Instead, you get this sort of trickles that come off them. You get these all these different forms, but they all center around these two big concepts. And these two big concepts would be Jung's conception of a god. So with that said, James, any thoughts before we run into it?
No, I'm ready to go on, man. I'm ready to crack on through this.
Excellent, sir. Well, the non-dyslexic James, would you please read for us?
Yes, we're on page 18 for anyone following along, and that's going to be paragraph 36. So here we go, people. Although there are, in my personal experience, a fair number of people who can understand without special intellectual or moral difficulties what is meant by anima and animus, one finds very many more who have the greatest trouble in visualizing these empirical concepts as anything concrete. This shows that they fall a little outside the usual range of experience. They are unpopular precisely because they seem unfamiliar. The consequence is that they mobilize prejudice and become taboo, like everything else that is unexpected. Now, I have a quick question to ask you, Stefan, before we because he
Okay.
says that there are a fair number of people who can understand without intellectual or moral difficulties what is meant by them. Who do you think these particular people are? Do you think it's like a genetic thing? Or do you think it's they've already gone through some kind of individuation process without realizing it? Because I'm curious about that. Is it like a special elite class of people who can naturally understand anima and animus?
I'm not too sure. I'm not sure if I have a solid opinion on this. Like, I imagine Jung may be talking about the artists, for
Yeah.
men specifically. Like the typical, as I said, the hero's journey typically is to be born a boyo, and then live in the village, and then it's like, you're such a fucking boyo, would you go do something with yourself? And you're like, I'm scared, and then it's like, stop being a scared little bitch and hiding with your mom and go out and do something. And then your dad dies, and you're like, fuck, I better go kill the guy who killed my dad. And you overcome your fear, run out into the forest. You find out that the guy lives in a castle with a dragon. You slay him and the dragon and get the girl. And it's like, moving out into the eros, into the chaos, into the wildness, and experiencing that. And that's the very typical masculine journey. It's very straightforward. Whereas the artist does something different. The artist sits down and they meditate on their emotions, and they meditate on their feelings, and it's kind of like, it's in many ways it could be framed as feminine. It's like, oh, you're such a soy boy. God, have you eaten so much soy that you're starting to write music? That's so gay. And you're like, oh, that hurts. And then you meditate about this, and then you start to communicate that. And it's not like, it's not necessarily intellectual or moral. It's something that you sort of do quite naturally. You're just in tune. You'd hear people say you're almost in tune with the muse. The artist always talks about the muse. That's the way you access the gods. And in my head, this is what Jung would sort of be saying, is that some people can just hack onto this quite easily, and in many ways do an abstract hero's journey and then bring something back. And these can also be people who are like healers and stuff like that, like some people are just, the shaman archetype. Some people are just more tuned into this stuff quite naturally, and so they just default into it. But I'm not sure that necessarily means that all artists and all shamans have like exclusive access to the anima. Oftentimes they will have to go through intellectual and moral conquests in order to understand this as well. So again, I'm not too sure what he means there, but
I don't think it necessarily means that people are consciously aware of it, because I think Jung may have been the first person who was consciously aware of this, because he defined these terms, right? So I think what you're saying is correct. Actually, it's the people who are unconsciously in tune with the gods. Basically, those people, like the artists, they sort of exist on the boundary between consciousness and the collective unconscious, and then they pull things through. You can become aware of them through things like active imagination. It's one of the funnest things that you can do. I've played around with that, and Jung was a master of that as well. His Red Book was basically him with his eyes open, semi-dreaming, just trying to contact the gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pulling things out from. I find that absolutely fascinating. But I also want to touch on. It says that basically what he's saying is that it's very difficult to know the anima and animus, and most people don't know them. So when they manifest themselves, that becomes taboo. But Jung's not defending the idea of anima and animus projections. So you can have you can project the anima and animus onto other people, and you can become possessed by the anima and animus. He's not saying, like in the modern terms, usually we think of taboos as things to be broken, that they're arbitrary. But Jung is saying that a taboo is something that naturally comes along with something being unfamiliar to you. But he still very much wants to get rid of them, more or less. They exist, but the best way for psychic health and psychic hygiene, and the path to become a more powerful and sane, grounded individual, is to integrate at least the parts of the anima and animus that you can integrate. That so the unfamiliar nature, I suppose, it's just most people are unconsciously not aware of these particular archetypes. We aren't aware of the particular effects that happen, and therefore that's classed as taboo.
Yes, it's very interesting. This is fundamentally where the rubber hits the road. This is where we start getting into this concept of a unconscious, a collective imagination that is actually has a mind of its own that's separate from the individuals. It's a very, very difficult idea. But Jung, and as I said before, this idea of duality of the lovers, of yin and yang, of anima and animus, logos, eros, these things are two separate concepts. They're like the order and chaos of reality, and they exist. And you could you could kill all of humanity and order and chaos would still be there. It's like that: would a tree fall if there was no one around to hear it? Would you hear the clap? So it would still exist, and it exists separate from us. And so these things have influence on us. And a really core theory behind Jung is that the alchemical theory, that we're made up of opposites, and the way towards progress is to unify those opposites. It's very Faustian in some ways. And so his idea is that, like, the universe is, it starts as one, that's God, and then it splits into two, and then from two you get four, and from four you get eight, and all the way down to into that shit. And so you get that division idea. And so the idea is we're always trying to unify and go back up. And a man and woman are inherently separate, but they're also inherently divided in themselves, because they've got a manly side and a feminine side, and they've got a glorious godlike side and a shadow fallen side. And this is, I guess, Jung is sort of getting mathematical in a weird way here. I think that's what he's trying to say. And for this reason, these big concepts, they're almost impossible for you to see directly, because they're just so huge. They're godlike, and they're so obscure. And then when they go even into yourself, the anima inside a man is getting information from the animus inside the collective. So this big concept that exists in the sky that is not really individual is like, it's like Angelina Jolie. She sort of represents the anima for a lot of guys. She's like a beautiful woman, and
you may be a generation older there. I know you're only a few years older than me, but yeah, I'd say when I was younger, Megan Fox or somebody like that.
Oh well, Megan Fox we can go with, because she's part of a beautiful clan of people called the Foxes. So we'll go with that.
Oh yes, of course, your mum, Megan Fox.
Yeah, how dare you? It's like Megan Fox would be like the Eve like Anima. So she's just the beauty. She's just gorgeous, and she doesn't really have that much of a personality. Like, she's that type of character. She fits in that type of place. And obviously behind it, she actually would have a personality. She's probably like a really cool person, but like, no one sees her that way, because she occupies that part of the collective unconscious. She's like the hot bitch that everyone wants to fuck. So it's like that place she holds in the world. And then when the man is looking into himself and thinking about his desires out of life, he wants to win. It's very, very low resolution. It's like he wants to achieve life. He wants to achieve success. And you literally would just see that as, mating with Megan Fox, as you might imagine yourself in your quiet nights. And it's that type of idea. It's like she is feeding in the information. Her image is getting fed in, and that image changes over time, and that image can be complicated. It can be Megan Fox on one level, but it can be Helen of Troy or Angelina Jolie in another. It can be Mother Mary in another one. And it's generational. It's very, very complicated, but it's this idea that it's feeding us and creating that type of thing. And that's why I think it becomes a very difficult concept for people to get across. And the way that relates to taboo, in my mind, would be whatever we occupy, whatever our current manifestation of the anima for the cultural context can be quite taboo. For example, if right now it's feminism is a very big deal. So, like the animus for women is very much dominated by the Me Too movement, for example. So that's something that's very potent right now. And that shows you that how much energy is charged into this, because sex is so important. There's a huge amount of energy charged into these concepts. I hope I explained that well.
Yes, that was beautiful. You called Megan Fox a hot bitch. You're making this the most academic lectures the world has ever seen.
Dude, yeah, forgive me. I'm burning the ship and taking you down with me, man.
Should we press onwards?
Yes, most certainly, sir.
Fantastic. So this is actually going to be a long section. I'm going to read this fairly slowly, but this is going to fucking blow your minds, people. This is fantastic.
Oh yes, okay.
Right. So if we set it up as a kind of requirement that projection should be dissolved because it is wholesomer that way, and every respect more advantageous, we are entering upon new ground. Up till now, everybody has been convinced that the idea my father, my mother, etc. is nothing but a faithful reflection of the real parent, corresponding in every detail to the original, so that when someone says my father, he means no more and no less than what his father is in reality. This is actually what he supposes he does mean, but a supposition of identity by no means brings that identity about. This is where the fallacy of the very long Latin or Greek word, otherwise known as the veiled one, comes in. And there's a footnote which explains that further. The fallacy, which stems from a couple of Greek people, I imagine, runs, can you recognize your father? Yes. Can you recognize this veiled one? No. This veiled one is your father. Hence, you can recognize your father and not recognize him.
Oh my
All right.
God.
If one includes in the psychological equation X's picture of his father, which he takes for the real father, the equation will not work out because the unknown quantity he has introduced does not tally with reality.
James, explain that to the people if you could.
Yep. Okay.
Me included.
Basically, the idea is when you mother and father are very important concepts. So, and they have been for all of mankind, that you have a mummy and you have a daddy, and from the mummy and the daddy, they not just raise you physically and provide you with an education and a nice home, but they actually inform your psychology. So up to now, the whole idea is what you think your father is, the image of the father in your mind, is not the actual father. It's tied in with other things. So like when I think of my father, for example, I might consider him to be far less heroic than he really is, or far more heroic than he really is. There are traits about him and his interactions with women and his interactions in the world which aren't actually reality. So there is what exists is what we talked about it earlier in 2 lectures ago, I think, like the mother imago. It's the idea that there is your mother and then there is the mother as such. And it's the same idea where it's very difficult to detach what's really true about your birth parents from what you consider them to be. And that's a fascinating thing. I think about your own mother and father. It's like you think you know them really well, and you think that you would know them well, right? That maybe you know them more than anyone else, and they know you more than anyone else. But chances are they're entangled by the anima and animus, that it's very difficult to detach the two, and they sort of merge and appear as one, if that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes unbelievable sense. Like, it's a very strange concept, this. I remember when I was growing up and I went to college, and I knew a few guys, and we were hanging out, and we were like talking about, growing up. One dude said something very interesting to me, and his parents were divorced. He said, I had this really weird experience last month where I was sitting there thinking about or talking to my dad, and I realized he's just a normal guy. And I was like, it was just really poignant because it hits you hard. It's like your dad isn't just a normal guy to you. Your dad is your fucking dad, and through your dad you access the idea of masculinity and stability. Like, when you're the son or the daughter, and you're sitting there, and there's a mom and a dad, you're getting access to the tenderness of the mom and the masculinity of the dad. And it's almost like inside you've got these categories predefined. You're searching for them. And so when you zoom in on your dad, you're expecting to find, godlike masculinity. But say if he's not, say if he's a soy boy dad, then you start to get a sort of distune. You're like, wait a second, he's not what that should be. And then obviously culture as well starts to inform you what it should be as well. And it becomes all complicated because the dad becomes this psychic energy point where you try to focus all these ideas, these concepts onto, and try to sort your mind out. And then you don't actually see the person, and start projecting all this shit onto him. And then a part of growing up is realizing that your dad isn't supposed to be like, some superb alpha male god beast. Like, maybe he is, and maybe he can be, but sometimes he's going to fail, and in many ways he's just going to be normal. Like, he's not like a mythological character. He's actually just a lad like you, and he has all the lad thoughts you had, and all the lad fears that you had as well. Like he experiences nervousness, and you expect your dad. I guess maybe I did. I expect my dad not to ever have doubts. You're sort of like, you got to be like supreme. You know what I mean? And it's like that type of projection you're putting onto him. And I imagine you definitely do the exact same with your mother. And your experience of your father, if he is harsh, cold, or strong based or weak, these things will inform your relationship to the masculine and cause discord within your soul. And so that would be, I guess, the difference between the reality, which is just your lad dad, and then your the projection and the necessary projections your psyche has to do in order to discover the universal concept of masculinity, the high level abstract godlike concept of masculinity in a father. That'd be my spin.
Yeah, there's the Freudian idea that you have to kill your father in order to become a man. It's a similar idea here, and Jung thought that you had to psychologically kill your father, and in many ways this is the beginning of that. It's the realizing that your mother and father are not the divine mother and father is a very strange thing. And I think that's reflected in the Oedipal myth. You know, it's like your father isn't the hero who you think he is, more than likely, and your mother is like a sexual creature. It's like those two are really, really difficult to sort of get into your own mind. You know, it's like they're not the divine mother and father. You know, they're not, what's the closest, like the Greek statues or some of the Greek gods. They're like just human beings like you, and they're flawed. And that, in order to, the path to maturity means you have to understand that. So of course we're only two young boys. We're not saying we've necessarily unconsciously done that completely, but it's like, this is a very important thing to do. You know, your father's not a hero, probably, and your mother is a sexual creature that your father conquested in order to create. It's a horrible thing to even think about. You know, it's you know,
the British prudishness comes out now.
Yeah, so I'm far too conservative.
This is not Victorian at all. Shut off the stream.
Yeah, man, I'm still living in the Victorian age. But and something else I want to defend as well. Like, we're living in the age of deconstruction, roughly. It's like I guess the postmodernist way of destroying everything and trying to assault categorization as such. And it's like you could read into that with the deconstructive mindset of like mother and father aren't important, therefore. And you know, it's like if they're not the heroes and with, you know, if they're not ascended into heaven like you think they are, it's like their mother and father surely are arbitrary categories. But I want to shut that down immediately before that comes up in your own head, because what Jung's actually defending is the opposite. So mother and father are very, very important concepts, because they are, you know, they're in many ways reflections of the anima and animus, and they feed into each other. So it's like a human being needs a mother and a father. It's like that you will always have mummy and daddy in your head somewhere in the collective unconscious. If you don't have it in reality, they are important things. So it's like when you, to try and reconcile this in our modern era of gender is fluid, you know, the idea that having two parents isn't necessarily important or wise, you know, Jung doesn't reflect that. And I think we're going to pay a hefty psychological price for going down that route. Because it's either the modern media and the modern elites with whatever narrative that they seem to be weaving together at the current time, or it's Jung. One of them's correct. It's like I'm going to bank on old Carl here. Thank you very much.
I think this comes down to the first principle we spoke about before, which is that the common trend in the modern world is to deny the fact that human nature exists and to insist that we are blank slates, which we can socially engineer into whatever we wish we would to be. And of course, that is a false assumption, or at the very least an assumption that should be taken a lot more serious before we accept it as a premise, which we have accepted as a premise. And it's already causing unbelievable problems. Like there's so many ruined families and people because of that shit. And, you know, it's a bad thing. But I've actually two other things I'd like to say. One of them is about the sexualized mother. It's very interesting that actually like strikes a chord inside you. You're like, oh my god, you'd like the idea of being like, I'm pretty sure my mom had sex once and that was to create me, and that was it. She was just like, I'm done with that.
Like the Virgin Mary and she randomly conceived somehow through some kind of genetic accident.
And I was actually going to get into that. I was like, it's very funny how Christianity centers around the idea, like Jesus had it so soft because his mom never had sex in a way. Like she's just sort of like, she was just like a virgin mom. You're like, yes, that's
like, this applies to you too. It's like you're not the divine child either. You're not the archetype of the divine child.
It's so annoying. So it's sort of like it's almost like the secret wish inside the Oedipal boyo, like the little soy boy is like, I wish my mom was banged by God, not by my dad. There's this sort of and if you think about that in a more advanced extent, this is where it becomes even more intense, is that in many ways, like human all too human, as Nietzsche says, it's like there is this realization, this sobering realization that your dad is not a Greek hero. And that breaks you down, and because that makes you realize that I'm not like the genetic lineage of a Greek hero. I'm not a god. And so the wish you wish would happen is that you were the son of a god. You wish you weren't the son of your dad. You wish you were the son of a god, because that would ennobilize you somehow. And so you're kind of like secretly wishing that your mom was banged by God in that type of way.
I want to quickly throw something in there from personal experience. Not quite a Greek god, but I'm obsessed with family trees. like absolutely obsessed with trying to, and I've pieced some of my family tree back to the early 1700s, and I'm trying to find some very, very significant person there, because for some reason there's like such a fire inside me of like, I'm the son of a hero. And I've pieced up a timeline with an American Civil War hero, and the timeline matches up perfectly. The face is like the same as my granddad's face, and I'm like, I'm descended from him. You know, it's like, and in my mind, it wants to be massively convinced by that, and I think it's like the same kind of idea. It's like, I'm descended from the gods. Like the father, as such, is like something better than everything else, something transcendent. There's an element of perfection in there that's passed down to you, and then it's as if you're like Achilles is the son of a god, isn't he? In the Iliad, and lots of those characters are. It's like you want to have that element to you, but it's like it's not the case.
100%.
It's definitely not the case.
All the ancient Greek, like Alexander the Great's dad, Philip of Macedon, genius man, but totally underrated. He was insistent that he was descended from Hercules, and all the ancient Greeks were like this. They always insisted that they were descended from the demigods, from the great warriors, because they wanted that. That's something that you want. You want to have that noble bloodline. And there's something very interesting about that, because the last thing you'd ever want to think is that you're just some hobbit, you know? And it's fascinating because, like, in some sense, there's probably truth to that. It's like you do want to have strong genetics, like, and you do want to discover, but in a weird way, like if you had strong genetics, you wouldn't necessarily have to discover it. You know what I mean? Like you'd be it. So there's this weird attempt to find validation in it somehow. And I wonder, is that a deeper attempt at you to try dig into something more abstract, like your soul, your masculine soul, is like maybe that's a secret desire to tap into the archetype within yourself, which is the based hero that you actually need to free, and it's a mistake that you're trying to look for that in your family tree. And I do it the same. Like I discovered that I had like a little bit of royal blood in me somewhere, and I was like, yeah, baby. And it's like that thing, you're latching onto that. It's almost like a lack of confidence in what you are as you are now. So it's very interesting.
There is a small piece of that within everybody, though. Like in England, we're all somewhat, somewhere along the line, descendants of Alfred the Great and William the Conqueror. You know, the further back you go, I think it's one Roman guy who's technically like the ancestor of everybody. I've read that somewhere on the BBC, but I don't necessarily trust the BBC. And but it's that idea. You do have, I guess, a spark of that kind of royalty for far back you go. So it is sort of real, but it's not your father. Probably not your father.
Yeah, definitely not. And see, it's really interesting because that's such a strange instinct in especially men. Like they're very, very obsessed with that, and it's funny how that works. And the last thing I wanted to say before we move on is that relates to that idea where you have you turn your dad into a hero. Do you ever notice that? Like when you're a kid, it's very common for the kid to like worship the dad. And it's like, I want to be exactly like him. You always want to be everything that he is. And then the kind of process of teenage years is forging your own identity. And that involves killing off that idea that your dad's exactly how you should be and becoming someone else. But at the same time, it's not that you, at the same time, like, I guess, are we rationalizing from a position where there might be a little bit of doubt aimed at our dads, when in many ways people of the past in more ideal positions who would have had a heroic dad, all these instincts would have been projected correctly onto their dad, and it would have been quite clean, and there would have been none of this psychological play. That's another thing to think about.
Possibly. I remember that one of the most heartbreaking moments of my entire life, where you can just feel something in your psychophysiology go boom, and there's like, and it never quite heals again. Is we were at a funeral of my aunt who passed away a few years ago. And my father, he's quite a stoic man. Like he's a complete Irishman, and his family never really showed emotions, and that was sort of instilled into me, I suppose. You know, not very huggy person, not a very emotional person. But my father, as the coffin was being lowered into the ground, he turned to this woman who he wasn't like good friends or anything, sobbed uncontrollably on her shoulder, just like that. It just came out of nowhere. And it's like suddenly my focus wasn't on my deceased aunt. It was like dum onto my father, that he just broke. It was about 10 seconds of weeping, and then he went back to being normal again. I was like, oh shit. You know, it's like, so the image that I had in my mind of the father wasn't the godlike image at all. It's like a mortal man who part of his heart had been slain. You know, that he
Wow.
showed weakness and that more feminine side of him, I suppose. It's like, oh shit, man. Like, and I it's almost like I still, you know, love my father and respect my father the same, but the image is different now.
Yeah.
It's like there's more of a tender compassion there, where it's like I can contribute to the relationship more too. It's almost like I've been pulled up to his level. It's
Yeah.
like in many ways it's killing the father. It's like can't go back from that.
And what's really interesting about that is you get in a position where you wanna. It becomes easier to become friends with them because you can empathize with them. I found that that's what happened is that similar things happened with me. And I went like through like a little phase where I resented my dad, and then I was angry at him, and it was really me just feeling that I wasn't good enough, and then I was like pushing that onto him. And it was after a while, after like I'm pretty sure I went through that symbolic killing of the father as well, and I realized that he was just some guy like anybody else. And then you can empathize with him because you realize you're going through the same experiences, and he's no longer on a level above you. You're somewhat similar. You obviously still respect him immensely, and he is way more wiser and more experienced than you. But you can become friends. It becomes this platform where you can like talk as lads in many ways, and then he can give that kind of wise man advice, and you can realize that it's your turn as the hero to step up and actually create something that will in many ways even provide and protect for him. Like he's going to be going into old age now, and now you're the responsible provider in many ways, which is an interesting shift of dynamics.
Yeah, my father doesn't tell me off anymore. So I'm 22, so he shouldn't really be telling me off. But I've got a younger brother, and I still like to, you know, muck about, I suppose. I can still be loud and boisterous or whatever. And he doesn't tell me off anymore. And I noticed that. I was like, I'm actually still being, like, I still reflect the little shit that I was when I was 14. Like, he still occasionally comes out, I'll still push just a little bit. He doesn't tell me off anymore. It's like that element of the father is dead. So it's almost like the relationships are fed into each other. So it's like being a friend, yeah. And like I'll go to the gym with him as pals rather than what. So when I was younger, it used to be he would take me off to do martial arts, and he would be the patriarch. And he's like, son, you do this and this and this. And I was like, hey James, do you want to come gym? I'm like, yeah, man. And then we'll work out or whatever. And then,
yeah, man.
Then they're like, he'll come over between workouts, like, hey, how you doing, man? You hitting those reps up? You're like, yeah, man. It's like, but the relationship's completely changed. It's like he's not. Yeah, it's like I've now been initiated into the herohood as well. So
yeah.
Equals. And like the way he speaks to me is like he departs knowledge on me like a friend, not like a dad anymore. And it's like it's almost sad, but it's like that's the way things have to change.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always wonder about this stuff, is that these dynamics, are they actually a consequence of modern society? Or are they like, would this naturally have expressed itself as like, you know, the Spartan idea of the father being the like the 60-year-old Leonidas who can still go and kill all the Persians? Like that idea of like, if you're his son, if you're Leonidas' son, it doesn't matter how much maturing you do, Leonidas is still the fucking G. Like you still bow every time you see him. And you imagine that actually would have happened. And the only way you can outrank your dad is when your dad gets killed in battle. So that's a very interesting dynamic. Is that the way the instinct would have naturally progressed? And
there are some individuals who are elevated to godlike status, like him, and Caesar was deified, and they used to deify the Egyptian pharaohs. So there are some individuals who reach such proficiency and such power that they start to inform the image of the animus in the culture. So it's like, yes, so there is an element to that if you were literally his son. But for most people's dads weren't Leonidas. So it was like we want them to be. There's something inside us that wants them to be, but they're not, and you got to disentangle them.
So it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting thought because like it's a harsh ego hitting thought. Is like if you were of prime genetic stock, would your father be the best? But I guess it doesn't work that way either. Like oftentimes the great victors in history were people who struggled from nothing and ascertained a great position, as opposed to being bred into a great position. Bar, of course, the exception, which was Alexander the Great. There is also, like, I guess on the father side, there is apparently a secret desire to always sabotage the son, like so he's never as great as you. There is that side of it too, and that's the fear the father has that the son is going to fuck the mother, I guess. So there's that side of it.
Yeah, maybe.
My man, continue.
Yes, yeah. So obviously, what we just interjected there, but Jung can explain things far better. So we talked about the veiled one. If one includes in the psychological equation X's picture of his father, which he takes for the real father, the equation will not work out because the unknown quantity he has introduced does not tally with reality. X has overlooked the fact that his idea of a person consists, in the first place, of the possibly very incomplete picture he has received from the real person. Obviously, you've got your persona, you don't see the whole real person. And in the second place, of the subjective modifications he has imposed upon this picture. X's idea of his father is a complex quantity for which the real father is only in part responsible, an indefinitely larger share falling to the son. So true is this that every time he criticizes or praises his father, he is unconsciously hitting back at himself, thereby bringing about those psychic consequences that overtake people who habitually disparage or overpraise themselves. However, if X carefully compares his reactions with reality, he stands a chance of noticing that he has miscalculated somewhere by not realizing long ago from his father's behavior that the picture he has of him is a false one.
Ooh.
But as a rule, X is conceived that he is right, and if anybody is wrong, it must be the other fellow. Should X have a poorly developed eros, he will be either indifferent to the inadequate relationship he has with his father, or else annoyed by the inconsistency and general incomprehensibility of a father whose behavior never really corresponds to the picture X has of him. Therefore, X thinks he has every right to feel hurt, misunderstood, and even betrayed.
That's so fucking crazy.
Yeah,
And like, so you've got this as I read this, you've got this situation where you've got this like the lad dad. That's the dad who likes drinking, the dad who, like, once wore a sock with a hole in it for like 2 weeks straight, had dirty underpants, like that type of dad. He's like the lad dad. And then you've got you, and you're trying to project onto him this noble idea that he's descended from Hercules, and you want him to be that, or else you're really disappointed in him. You're disappointed in yourself, and so you project, because he's your lineage, you project onto him the idea that, oh, he's just like an ultimate beta male that's dragging me down. It's like this self-hate thing. And as Jung is saying, these two projections are actually reflections back in your own inner hate for yourself, or love for yourself, or desire to be great. It's all a projection, and these become a shield that you never really see dad himself, who's like just a boyo who wants to go to the gym and, like, lift weights with you and all that. And so you get caught by this shield. And I think what Jung is trying to say is that this shield is constructed by what he call a weaving force, a masculine force, even a feminine force. Sorry, yeah, it's constructed by a feminine force called the Anima. It is an unconscious force that is your emotions inside you, your eros, are like literally extend out into the world and paint your world. So if your emotions, if your eros, if your anima, if your feminine side has self-doubt, if you have vulnerability, if you're insecure about yourself, you won't see your father. You will see the projection, the anima projection. Really complicated idea, but that's what he's getting at when he says the idea that the anima is a projection creating tool. It's the Maya, it's the weaving tool that blocks the Buddhist meditator from accessing the true father, which is God or Nirvana or whatnot. And so there is this really important concept he's trying to draw here, is that this projecting factor, that even the actual projections themselves are the shadow in many ways, but the projecting making factor is the feeling inside you. It's the anima. It's that type of soul. And unbelievably deep when you dig into that. Like, that is a monstrous idea. That is an idea that everybody should take with like such deep seriousness. The idea that your emotions, your anima, your feminine side can cause you to project bullshit out onto the world. And the way that you can actually see the world for what it is to go into your feelings, as gay as it sounds, and actually deal with them properly, is incomprehensibly powerful. And that's how you source your true courage and your true virtues and whatnot. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a very good summary of basically everything we've covered so far. Like the subtitle of the book, Research into the Phenomenology of the Self. So there's the book's all about phenomenology, and it's a lot of what we've covered so far has been projections and projection making factors. And that's a very difficult way to, it's difficult to get your head around, because it's like, what the hell do you mean by projection? And that's exactly what it means. So it's like the projection is like the shadow. So the things which cause you emotional pain that you look on in the world, a lot of the times that's the shadow that's being projected onto other people. Right?
Yes.
And then by analyzing that properly, you can understand that, okay, it's almost like an excuse. So an unconscious excuse that your father is meant to be descended from Hercules, or even Hercules himself. He is the animus as such. He's that particular Greek hero, but he's not. And it's not the father's fault either. It's your fault, your unconscious fault, your ego's inability to communicate properly with the unconscious that's projecting this shit onto other people. And so it's the projection, and then the projection making factor within the man is the animus. The anima, sorry, getting that the other way around. So this basically sums up everything we've done so far, which is like, you know, trust Jung to do that. Beautiful man, love him.
Yeah, well thought out. We've got a few chats. Do you want to read them before we go on?
Yeah, let's bump through the chats.
We have Bope Bope 1469. Glad I found you guys. Good morning from Canada. Thank you very much, Bope.
Hello, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Glad you're here, Bope. Harris shit. Harris shit. Rajora. God, clean up your room, James.
Yeah, I mentioned that in the last stream that we did. I'm at my parents' house at the moment, and my fiance's here, and that's a dog cage. So it's because we brought the dog with us. So it's like, where am I meant to put all this? Is the fiance's shit? Where am I meant to put it? So there you go. Sorry, I'm Jordan would be very upset with me.
Yeah, what the hell, James? What the hell is this? Do you ever see that fake meme of Jordan where he's there and he's looking all serious, and they paste behind him like a dirty room? It's so fucking close.
Yeah, there's the one of my favorite memes of him. I don't know why. It's just like a New York Times best-selling book cover, and it's got Jordan Peterson, wash your penis. I don't know why that's so funny.
I've heard that. Yeah, I heard that's memeing. Bope 1469 again says Megan Fox can get it.
I mean, no comment, but you can read into that what you will.
We have this strange character here called Mr. Castles.
Oh, yes, I've heard of him.
The father which can be named is not the true father. I actually that is a reference to God Almighty in the heavens, so that's an awesome one as well.
Yes, and that's also true. We're going to get into the Peterson thing. What's really true? But so you have different fathers which all get entangled into each other, and you should separate them out through reading Jung, I suppose, into what they really are. That like you've got the spirit of masculinity, you've got the animus, and you've got what you think men are in the world and women are in the world, which they aren't really. Then you've got your biological parents, which aren't the same thing as those, and they all get tangled into. It's a complete mess.
It's so confusing, but it's so powerful as well. People, any chats, drop them in. James, let's continue.
Right, let's go. So paragraph 38 for anyone reading along. One can imagine how desirable it would be in such cases to dissolve the projection. And there are always optimists who believe that the golden age can be ushered in simply by telling people the right way to go. But just let them try to explain to these people that they are acting like a dog chasing its own tail. To make a person see the shortcomings of his attitude considerably more than mere telling is needed. For more is involved than ordinary common sense can allow. What one is up against here is the kind of fateful misunderstanding which, under ordinary conditions, remains forever inaccessible to insight. It is rather like expecting the average respectable citizen to recognize himself as a criminal. There's some seriously deep shit in there. We have to touch on. There are always optimists who believe that the golden age can be ushered in simply by telling people the right way to go.
Fuck yeah, dude. That is like, this is just such hardcore shit. This is actually a massive core conflict of our culture. Again, this is based on that blank slate idea. It's that idea that we are perfect in our nature, and we're able to construct socially. The problem is society, and we can socially construct ourselves into this sort of utopia society of some sort, as opposed to Jung, who is positing the Catholic, the Christian idea of original sin based in our nature that we need to overcome with an individuation, a self-discovery process where we conquer ourselves and make ourselves through morals and through virtue into a great person. And what's so fucking fascinating about that is that idea runs, this is the reason why Jordan Peterson is doing so well, is that idea runs so deep that it is the premise of the entire Western world. And once we ran that premise through the simulation, it fucking worked, like seriously. And now we're in the process of trying to detach that our civilization from that premise, and our civilization is on the cusp of collapsing if we're not careful. It's so fucking fascinating. And so you see someone like Karl Marx. This is the clean your own room idea. You see someone like Karl Marx, and Karl Marx has this like idea about the world where he's like, look, the world is shit. So what I need to do is I need to fix it. And here's how you fix it. And he articulates this beautiful communist utopia. And everybody gets on board and they take over Russia and they murder fucking everyone. It's disgusting, you know? And you look at Karl Marx's life, and Karl Marx was like broke. He was abusive towards his wife. Many of his children starved. He was a dirty man. He was like big and hairy. He always smelled. He was not together at all. He was a bit like, you know, he was a worthless person. And he was someone who never really explored himself properly. And he had an intellectual problem where he assumed that all he needed to do was articulate the kingdom of heaven in order to make it happen, instead of working through these weird projections that he was having. He never asked himself, maybe I feel resentful towards capitalism because I don't feel good enough to kind of go for it and achieve something. Maybe he wanted to be a fiction writer or something like that. Like maybe there was an emotional, an eros instability in him that was creating this projection over reality, which was the world. And so he articulated the projection instead of dealing with the projection. And from articulating the projection and putting it out into the world, it was actually such a toxic meme that it literally took over. And as you can see here, Jung is trying to source the idea that evil is grounded in ourselves, and when we project our evil out into the world, and worse, get fascinated by it, getting captured by it, we can do unbelievably terrible things. We can run Marxism or something like that and destroy the fucking, you know, destroy the Soviet Union, destroy the Russian Empire and all that. And it's that type of idea that it is so powerful and profound. And again, just trust Jung, to someone who understands the human soul, to see why it matters so much. James, what's your fucking thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts on that. Like, I think Jocko Willink and his idea of extreme ownership is very, very, very important. Because it doesn't go psychologically deep. Like, so Jocko is the Navy SEAL guy, and he wrote the book Extreme Ownership with another one of his ex-Navy SEAL friends, and it was basically a book designed to do with leadership. So in order to be a leader, you have to basically take responsibility for everything, and you can't blame other people, right? So it's in a psychological version of that applied to your own life. It's essentially ignore it's not fix the projections, which is what Jung is saying, but it's like ignore the projections, treat everything as if it was your fault, which is the same thing, just articulated in a more easily accessible and digestible fashion. You know, it's like, imagine that everything is your fault. So it's avoiding those projections onto the world, which, yeah, and then we get into the problem of evil later on in the book. It becomes obvious that a lot of the, if not all of the atrocities are, and this was Solzhenitsyn's idea as well, are the result of your psychology not being completely together. And you know, and is it your psychology? It's like, yeah, but what we mean by your is there are other factors in your brain pulling the strings.
Oh my God.
It's like, yeah, the line between good and evil lies within your psyche, but it's not you, it's you, the environment that is you. You know, it's like, so you have to make sure that is together. Every resentful emotion that comes out, you know, it's why Nietzsche talks a lot about resentment, and Peterson talks a lot about resentment. It's like all of those emotions which don't actually have a rational basis to them, and you blaming other people and you blaming other things, and you not seeing things the way they really are. It's like the feminist myth, they see the patriarchy as just bad. It's like, no. The reason why they see it as just bad is a projection from their mind onto the outside world. That's not the nature that things really are. So I'd just like to, if anyone hasn't looked into extreme ownership, if you want to start improving your psychological health, that's probably the best place to start. Either that or Jordan Peterson's lectures, whatever. But I think that's a very, very good concept to begin with.
I think the best laconic lilt I've heard on this is that not everything is your fault, but everything is your responsibility. I love that. Like, you know, just assume everything's your responsibility. If you want, just assume everything's your fault. It's even a good exercise if you can not take it too seriously and just assume that everything that happens is your fault. No one, even if someone insults you, it's still your fault somehow. And just try that for like 3 months or something.
Well, because it might be your fault. It really might be your fault. It's like,
well, it's
how
more,
did you act in the past? Or how did you act around that person? And obviously, if they're insulting you, it's like they see you as something else that you're not really in reality. So it's like maybe you could take responsibility for fixing that. So
it's
if,
true. Yeah.
you know, if whatever outcome you desire in the world, you should take full responsibility for it. Yes, because otherwise, don't presume other people are going to pick up the slack.
And what's interesting about this is it bullies you into self-reflection. It bullies you into internalization. And the problem is that, as Jung is describing here, our problem is that we outwardly project. We look onto the world and we see the problems. We feel that there's something wrong, and we feel all these negative emotions because the world bullies us around and all that. And so we look out into the world and we say, this is how we would fix this. But we could take that same energy and understand this architecture that Jung is laying up here, saying that, you know, you've got this reality, which you could even describe as God. And then there's this mask being placed over reality, which is Maya, which is the anima, the projections, the illusion. All right. This is the movie screen. And the source of those projections that you're fucking fascinated in, like it's a beautiful woman, you're just like, wow, it's so great. It's exactly what's up. And I see all the problems and I see how to fix it. The source of that is actually the firing emotions, eros, inside yourself. And so when you feel that resentment towards the patriarch, what you need to do is understand that the way to fix that may not be to change the patriarch, but in actually to go into yourself and look at the source of that emotions and articulate it properly, bring it to life, see what it's really trying to say. And it might actually clear things up for you. And then you'll see reality a lot more. And when you do this process properly, I think what Jung is trying to say is that you don't get to that place where you can change the world until you've at least done some work in yourself. And then you can start seeing what's going on. You can see reality, and it may be quite evil. Like there may be serious problems, but at least you're dealing with the reality there. That's the most important thing. And then at that point, you're in a real position to be a really impactful person, but you have to do this shit first. And it's just so powerful. And Jung is literally laying out in these books the actual step-by-step method for you to do it, you motherfucker, and you're too fucking lazy. Jesus, what the fuck's wrong with you?
Or of course you could listen to Ben Shapiro just saying facts don't care about your feelings.
Yes.
It's a nice tagline. It's a nice tagline, but it's like that's a mechanism through which you can examine your projections. It's like, is this true or is this not true? You know, so or I think they're popular for a reason, for a variety of reasons. You know, a voice for the disenfranchised and whatever, but also because what they're saying has psychological weight. All those big figures that have popped up in the public space are actually tapping into something in the individual psychology. It's very powerful. But shall we crack on, sir?
Yes, most certainly.
Cool. So this is paragraph 39 for people following along. I mention all this just to illustrate the order of magnitude to which the animus projections belong and the moral and intellectual exertions that are needed to dissolve them. Not all the contents of the anima and animus are projected. However, many of them appear spontaneously in dreams and so on, and many more can be made conscious through active imagination. In this way, we find that thoughts, feelings, and affects are alive in us, which we would never have believed possible. Naturally, possibilities of this sort seem utterly fantastic to anyone who has not experienced them himself, for a normal person knows what he thinks. Such a childish fucking attitude on the part of the normal person is simply the rule, so that no one without the experience in this field can be expected to understand the real nature of anima and animus. With these reflections, one gets into an entirely new world of psychological experience, provided, of course, that one succeeds in realizing it in practice. Those who do not succeed can hardly fail to be impressed by all that the ego does not know and never has known. This increase in self-knowledge is still very rare nowadays and is usually paid for in advance with a neurosis, if not with something worse.
Whoa. Okay, the next paragraph's a monster, but there's a few things I'd love to cover up here.
Go for
it. Like that is an astounding paragraph as well. And he takes a pretty hard punch at the common man. And he's sort of suggesting that, like, the way we orientate ourselves in life is actually fundamentally ignorant of the reality of how big of a deal what's going on inside our noggins is. And that's a massive obstacle towards the utopia, shall we say, like we'll say generally, we all want to reach the kingdom of God, we all want to reach the utopia, and everybody has their theories about how to get there. And so like some political figure comes up and says like, we'll do this and do this and establish this policy and this policy and this policy, and everybody is like, yep, they're fucking on board. And there's like definitely merit in that. You do need to organize your system and all that. But on the flip side, there is also an aspect, a reality, which is that the biggest obstacle is almost always the development of the individuals who make up the society. That is what a utopia is. It's a group of people. And so institutions like the church fascinate me, because what they were giant projects in order to psychologically mature massive populations. Like the European pagans, as much as we love larping about them, and they're pretty cool, and I do like respect paganism quite a lot, and I love researching about it, but you kind of look at what Christianity did, is that it took over all of Europe and disciplined Europe for many years to focus on its own internal psychology, and taught it how to deal with its guilt, and sort of tamed it in some way. And there is actually a massive amount of merit in it. I've heard people describe the church as this ability to impose logic or logos on the eros, or the chaos of the mind, if you will. And that's a very interesting idea. And in many ways, what that idea, what's fundamental to that idea, is that premise that 1,000 years of teaching people to focus on themselves produces European, American, modern Western civilization, not a Marxist theories implemented over the course of 100 years poorly. That destroys civilization, because the premise that you're attacking is the soul, and the soul is what manifests the great society. It's such a fucking big idea. Like, it's such a big idea. I've loads more to say here. I've actually got some notes written down, but do you have anything to say, sir?
Yeah, so like children are quite arrogant. Like they think they know everything. And at the same time, interestingly, children also think that mummy and daddy are divine. Like my mummy's the best mummy, my daddy's the best daddy, whatever. But we've already covered that part of things. But children are very arrogant. It's interesting that he said a childish attitude, because Jung doesn't. Well, I mean, he does occasionally, but he doesn't just sort of throw slurs around to insult the soy boys. We fooled you at the beginning, of course. But that's a very interesting thing to think about, because Socrates, I think it was Socrates who said, like, the wise man knows he knows nothing, right? And it's very. You can get very cynical about that. It's like, of course I know something, right? But it's the attitude, and that's this important thing. The wise man has the attitude that there are an infinite number of things that dwarf his knowledge, and that's a very mature attitude, and it's not something that children do. Most people don't do it, and also I'm not claiming that us chiseled jaw boyos do that either. But the ego is you, the man, right? The man who knows he knows nothing. That's your ego, and it's arrogance on behalf of the ego, which enables you to live in some kind of illusion. You're sitting there watching the puppet show. It's almost Plato's analogy of the cave, where people are sort of just sitting there watching the puppet show, and they're like, that's reality. Yes. And then one person breaks away, and he goes outside and he sees everything, and then he returns, he's killed by everybody. So it's like an interesting experiment to do, and I'm not going to get specific on this to avoid getting into trouble. But if there's something in you that you consider to be taboo, or it's just something that doesn't quite sit right with you, self-reflection into that and trying to elucidate specifically what's pulling the strings, and that would be very useful to do. And what our culture tends to do these days, I would love to see what Jung would have thought about this, is they take the taboos and they sort of use it as an excuse to destroy all categories, because fundamentally that's chaos. And if you take the world of the anima and the animus projecting onto the world, it varies from person to person. It is chaos as such. It's just there is no order. Anything goes. It's like that seems to be what our culture is doing. It's becoming very unconscious, and the whole path to individuation is becoming more conscious. And that's in many ways that's the Christian myth, and that's what some of Peterson's stuff reflects. Down at the core, it's you avoid the suffering and you avoid the delusions and the pain by becoming more conscious of things. And that's exactly what you do with this. It's like the whole idea of individuation, this process of psychological maturity, is you integrate the contents or as much of the collective unconscious as you can, because what that means is, and it's a very painful thing to do, because it means you're not watching the puppet show anymore. You see reality how it really is, and you accept reality how it really is. And he's saying that children don't do that.
Mhm.
But one of the things we've said is like you kill your father and you kill your mother, right? It's like you don't see them as the divine thing, and that's a part of it, but it's like you take responsibility for your shadow projections, for example. That's another very important thing to do. And the consequences of not doing this, and this is where Solzhenitsyn comes into it. It's with, he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, and in many ways Viktor Frankl with Man's Search for Meaning. It's like you need to take responsibility for the darkness inside of yourself, because if you believe the world to be the puppet show that it really is, the lie, it's almost like Satan in and of itself. It's like, then that's the world you're going to bring about. And it's something you have to take unbelievably seriously.
It's like, yeah, it's so hard to really punch right in the stomach just how deep this idea is. This idea is the money. This is the money. Like this is what they figured out. This is what we have theorized in all of philosophy and concluded. It's like, this is how you do it. Like this is that big of a deal. And it's so counterintuitive to what our nature does. Our nature wants to always project outwards. That it's the single hardest thing to tell people, because it's the exact opposite of what they want to hear, which is fucking hilarious because it's the solution. It's so crazy. And Jung talks about morals. I said this in the last thing, and I find it fascinating, is that the virtues instantiated in religions are almost always best used as psychological virtues for dealing with yourself. So humility is a psychic superpower I wrote here. So you can get that wise man thinks he knows everything, but the and then you do self-reflection. But there's a certain way you have to do self-reflection. You have to analyze your emotional responses to what's going on. So in many ways, you have to accept premises like you don't know everything. You have something to learn. You might not be perfect. You could probably be wrong. You're probably angry because you're resentful and all these type of things. And in order to inspect deeply, you have to almost be like a beta male inside your own head to an extent. And this is weird, because the reason why this is so counterintuitive is because you need to be like a based alpha when you're in the world. That's how you succeed. You need to have like strength and grounded and push forward in that way. But when you're self-criticizing, you need to almost undermine yourself as much as you can. So in order to create that strong, present alpha male character, if you will, you do need to engage in this more reserved an undercutting thing side of yourself to deal with your psyche. And this is why I think people often criticize Christianity for being like an effeminate religion. And in many ways, I'm like, it's sort of like, it actually isn't in a way. Like the guy died for what he believed. It's more, perhaps you say, it's more intelligent in the fact that it realizes that the psyche is a feminine place, and in many ways you have to deal with the feminine side of your emotions, and you have to use in many ways self-degrading virtues in order to achieve real progress within there. But when you put these things into play, you develop the supreme masculine traits, such as like being based, being stable, having strong boundaries and whatnot. And I think that's a really important idea to get across, is the humility that is required in order to do this problem, to do this individuation thing correctly, in order to deal with this model and realize that the projections are something you're seeing within. I'm just going to briefly riff off the idea of how these projections might manifest, and then we can move on, because...
Yep, go for it.
Okay, cool. So a few things I've written down here is the idea that Eros is intimacy. So I keep saying Eros, and it's the man needs to deal with the Eros. So it's kind of, it's interesting. It's like, what does that mean? Eros is like intimacy, it's touch, it's vulnerability, it's closeness, and it's the stuff of life. As I said, it's the Dionysian thing. And that's almost always associated with the mother. The first experience is that type of motherly thing. And the way these archetypes can go sour, for example, is that, say, the mother is distant. What Jung said would happen is that the boy would sit down and over intellectualize. So instead of getting the closeness of life, the feeling side of it, even the feminine aspects of it, if you will, and the mother, which is supposed to supply you with that, is off at work, for example. She's busy, she's not around, or even worse, she actually just is uncaring and on her fucking iPhone all day. The boy will start trying to figure out what's up. He'll start thinking, he'll get stuck in his head. The logos will go insane. The logos will not get grounded, and so he will start projecting, and he'll develop this habit, and it'll become part of his personality. He will become a intellectualizer, an over intellectualizer. He'll become no good at dealing with his eros, so he'll be able to think elaborately, but he won't be able to inspect his thoughts through the veil of his feelings, of his emotions, of his prejudices, of his resentment, of these fires that are fundamental to it. And that is actually what causes a massive problem. It's not just about self-reflection, where you just go into these retarded, like purity spirals or intellectual spirals. It's actually seriously about dealing with the actual angle of the psyche that Jung is getting at here, which is the eros. It's about dealing with the emotions that control your perspective and control the way you think. Emotions dominate your thoughts more than thoughts do in many ways. And the same with a girl and their father. If the father's distant, she might start formulating a weird animus problem or something like that. It's that same type of idea. The flip side of this is if the mother is too close, then she will soften the boyo and turn him into a soy boy. So he's like over eros. He's like too much touch, and his logos can never kind of identify itself outside of it, or he can never establish sort of ruggedness outside of her. And so he softens, he becomes weak, and it becomes difficult. And then what happens is you start to try to find these traits, or a way to heal these traits in women, or you might even develop resentment that you have towards your mother in women, like these eros emotions you have to deal with. You might project them out into women when you're in the sexual market and whatnot. So I think that's really important to bring up, is that it's how these projections might start, and then the problems that they might have, and then how you have to go into yourself and fix them. And it's really counterintuitive often. That's all my thoughts.
Yeah, that was very good. And you will definitely have projections, dear viewer. You will definitely have projections, because your mother and father are not the divine mother and father.
Yes.
They aren't perfect, so you will have projections, and you have to understand them. So in many ways, this is applicable to every single person watching this.
Yeah,
so we're out here changing lives, Stefan. I'm very, very proud of myself. What I want to say is, I think I haven't really paid too much attention, but I think we're hitting the hour mark fairly soon. So I've got a choice for you. We can either continue and do a 2-hour lecture, or we can pause here, answer the questions in the chat if we have any properly, and then come back to this in the new year.
Any more chats? Or I'm happy to go for another hour, but it's up to you, dude.
Yeah, I'm happy to go for another hour too.
All right, let's fucking do it, motherfucker. This stuff is deep, so it's gonna be slow slog, but let's do it, dude. Let's do it.
Cool. So this is a very long paragraph, this next one, so I'm going to break it up as and when I see fit. So the autonomy of the collective unconscious expresses itself in the figures of Anima and Animus. They personify those of its contents which, when withdrawn from projection, can be integrated into consciousness. To this extent, both figures represent functions, in italics, which filter the contents of the collective unconscious through to the conscious mind. They appear or behave as such, however, only so long as the tendencies of the conscious and unconscious do not diverge too greatly. Should any tension arise, these functions, harmless till then, confront the conscious mind in a personified form and behave rather like systems split off from the personality, or like part souls.
Oh my God.
This comparison is inadequate insofar as nothing previously belonging to the ego personality has split off from it. On the contrary, the two figures represent a disturbing accretion. The reason for their behaving in this way is that though the contents of Anima and Animus can be integrated, they themselves cannot, since they are archetypes. As such, they are the foundation stones of the psychic structure, which in its totality exceeds the limits of consciousness and therefore can never become the object of direct cognition. Just when you think you understand things, Jung throws this out there, and he's like, well, actually, Anima and Animus are sort of split into different parts as well now, boyos. So have a good job explaining that to the fine public.
This is where the rubber hits the road. It is so hard to get your head around, but it is unbelievably profound in its depth as well. This is where like I don't think people should take this in any way lightly when he says the autonomy of the collective unconscious. Like, he's suggesting very, very slyly there that the autonomy means will, if you will. It means separate entity. It means livingness in some sense. Like, I see this type of idea that he's getting here, that in the collective imagination, where these archetypes live, and feed information down to us. These archetypes are separate than us, bigger than us, and they are also autonomous, meaning that they work separate than us. Now, Jung reduces this scientifically down to functions. So it's almost like we're living in this machine, and the anima and the animus are like tools of that machine. But like, I don't know where you can draw the line between that and the idea of a god, if you will. Like you're dealing with something massive there. You're dealing with a big, big, big idea. Enough that it should scare you that we don't believe in these things. We don't believe in the idea that there's gods in heaven affecting us. Jung has given you a very based psychological, technical way of believing it, even though I'm sure he personally felt that it was a lot more, shall we say, mystical than it was. And it's that idea that there are these functions built into our psyches that affect us like literally like they were gods. It doesn't matter if they are or not, they affect us like they were. And these things also exist separate from our psyches in a collective psyche that functions like it was heaven. Like these things have the function of these big ideas. These things function like there's a heaven. These things, the things that live in heaven, function like they're gods. And what the gods do is the anima and the animus live in heaven, and you don't really ever get to see them. But sometimes they will come down to you in the form of dreams, and they will take form. So they live in heaven, Plato's space of forms in the collective unconscious, if you will, and then they will descend out of heaven in a form of a dream or maybe in a hallucination or something like that. But they'll take the form of an angel, or they'll take the form of whatever is the dominant archetype of that era. You know, you might dream about Megan Fox. So that means that it's not that Megan Fox went to sleep that night and said, oh, James P Dowling. It's like, what happened is
I wish she did. She's getting my hopes up now, man.
I know,
actually,
yeah,
not Megan Fox
I
anymore. She's probably like 57 years old at this point.
You know what?
And I'm too out of touch with the culture to think of another girl.
She's definitely only like 29 or something. What? That's so funny.
I'm gonna look that up now. How old Megan Fox is?
Okay, yeah, dudes, we're like, fuck the young stuff. Let's just look at girls. That's it. We're off this. So you have this idea that yes, the profound feminine force that dominates.
She's 32, by the way. If anyone wondering,
that's close. The profound feminine force that dominates all of life, that you are connecting with. You are always dealing with femininity and masculinity because that's what this world is made out of. It's made out of that duality, those fundamental powers of order and chaos. It's there. It's real, and it lives in heaven. And Jung is saying it's autonomous in our psyches. It almost lives. It's almost like a god, these two things, a god and a goddess, if you will. And when you are going through the phases of psychic development, you will perhaps get messages from these gods, and it will appear to you the form of like an angel flying down, like Megan Fox being like, oh my God, you're so sexy. It's like really low resolution. Or it could be Sophia. It come down in the form of like a granny who's telling you to be more fucking Catholic because you've gone off the rails or something like that. And it's all this idea of you've got the big God up in the big idea of heaven that's functioning in this psychic way. And then you can never perceive that directly. You can't see heaven. If you saw heaven, you'd go insane. Very few people can experience that. So what happens instead is that you get these manifestations of these big ideas. And this, for you, it becomes difficult because you perceive all these different women in your dreams and you can't really unify them. But Jung says if you unify them, they all collect around this idea of femininity as such, and they all serve a very specific function. And that function is to be the emotions inside your soul that almost like a projector screen project the illusion out onto the world. And if you can deal with your emotions in your soul, the illusion that she is creating will fall apart and you'll get access to true wisdom. And that's very interesting because the highest form is Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. What's your thoughts on that? It's a very interesting idea. Did I explain that clearly enough? Would you like me to try it again?
No, yeah, you definitely explained that clearly enough. My mind immediately goes to, so what's the distinction between polytheism and monotheism and all the different pantheon of gods and all this stuff? Because if you treat the anima and animus as gods, then are they on the same level as Christ, if you were to create some kind of hierarchy of gods? And not quite. Not quite. It's like there's like a deeper bit further in, which is what Christ would be, which is the symbol of the self. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. And you know, and in the Greek world, the gods were above people, but they would come down and interact with people, and they would oftentimes be beaten by people. Like you would be able to trick them, or you would be able to defeat them, and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, that's interesting that the individual can contend with them. You know, so I almost like to think of it as the gods, these lesser gods, I suppose, but still gods exist somewhere in the collective. You know, and this is why the Greeks and other such societies believed in this type of god. Like, it's like, because they functionally are, and they're almost offering challenges to you. It's almost like they're just, what Jung's saying here is that the gods exist, and they will throw out a projection, and then the psychically healthy person, almost as a checkpoint on their psychological development, will be like, aha, challenge accepted. I've integrated. I understand the true meaning of that, almost. So it's like, and then you start leveling up further and further and further. So the gods will always be separate to you, no matter how far you go. You can integrate their projections to make yourself, almost to remove the illusion from the world, and doing that makes you more conscious. So in many ways, it's elevating your consciousness as a person. You know, so it's not live under the god spell. It's like, and I hesitate to say, it's not become a god yourself, but it's like see through and see the world for what it really is. It's like, there may be gods, but there's also you as the individual. You know, and that's why there's that hierarchy. You know, you've got the divine masculine, the divine feminine. There's also you. Your ego is also a very important part of this. It's like almost accepting challenges from the gods as they come.
I've noticed that from doing like heavy work on dream reading, is that when I would do a lot of dreams and abstract out a character and properly articulate that character, I would get flushed with energy, almost as if I'm switching something on inside me. And in many ways, you're almost getting possessed by the god. In a weird way, by articulating the god, you turn the god on in you, and then you'll spend like a month where you're, for example, I turned the warrior on, and I had to spend the month where when I go into the gym, I just like absolutely rip through deadlifts in the gym. It was so weird. My attitude was like just heavy and hard. And after a while, I sort of burned myself out somewhat. I was like, the energy kind of faded a bit, but I was different after that. I'd sort of like, I was a lot more resilient somehow. And it's almost like I gained something. And it was that experience of access and Aries, if you will. And so this becomes very, very interesting, because no matter monotheism or not, these things still exist in your psychological architecture, like you're saying. And so in many ways, you've got lower level gods like the pantheons, who represent the psychological realities that you experience in your life. And they're there, and they're almost like lower manifestations of these higher ideas. And I guess monotheism is trying to say, worship the source at its highest, but the true, I guess, religion, the functional religion almost always has to articulate out these lower forms. Like you have the angels and the saints and whatnot. Like it needs to happen that way. It needs to articulate things that type of way. And this is why Christianity interests me, is that, and paganism interests me, is that I don't see why they can't be compatible. Like you can hold Christ as the highest value and still have the idea that the levels up to Christ will contain pagan-like gods, because that's what we do anyway. It's pretty much what the Irish did when Christianity came over here. They combined them with the Tuatha De Danann and Bridget and all that. So so it's a very interesting idea, and it's very interesting how it's like a computer game where you're psychically leveling up, and you're trying to gather a little bit more of the feminine, a little bit more of the masculine, and all these type of things, and slowly making your way up to the fullest version of yourself you possibly can.
Yeah, what you were saying, it's a reflection of something Jung said in the previous paragraph. He said, with these reflections, one gets into an entirely new world of psychological experience, provided, of course, that one succeeds in realizing it in practice. So what he's actually implying, and this is really cool, and this stops it being purely, because I'm sure lots of people listening to this are just interested in Jung, but it's like, if you are actually able to do this in practice, your entire world will change.
Oh yeah.
Like we mentioned in I think it was lecture 2 on the ego, where I felt the ego development happen out of the blank autopilot mode. The ego came forth, so my experience of the world became totally different. And it's like, the more I try and develop my masculine side, the more that changes too. And it's reflected in things like hormonal profile or whatever, biological health, because that informs you. Your microbiome health, just keeping it biological for a second, your microbiome health informs you and your personality and the way that you see the world. And it's like, and I guess what you were doing with your dream reading, it's like, the more you understand, or the more you integrate just a little piece of that God, just a little gift that it's given you, your world physically changes. And it's like why don't you take Jung just on faith? The idea is so cool. And you think to yourself, I really want that. I want to see what that version of me looks like. Start doing exactly what Jung's saying in this book. Start recognizing those projections and seeing what you can do about it, because that makes you stronger and more powerful, and that will change your entire world. And that's really cool. So I suppose the hypothesis is that's what Christ did, and the end result of that was he transcended bodily death, which I shan't comment on. But it's like, what happens if you manifest psychic phenomenon as fully as you possibly can, or even a little bit more than you are right now? What's that going to do for you? It's like, that's so it's not snake oil salesman, it's a hypothesis. It's like, see so what happens. I'm not selling you anything, it's just see what happens.
It's so cool because there is that sort of idea of like, did Christ play the video game and meet all the gods all the way up to the final god, which is Satan, and then defeat him and then get the final reward, which was eternal life? Like, did he do that?
That's the hypothesis.
Because what Christ did before he became Jesus was he got baptized, God spoke to him, and then he went and became a hermit for a while. Or maybe it was the other way around. But nonetheless, he did a hermitage point where he did a lot of inner work on his own. And that's a fucking crazy idea. That's quite a common theme. Zarathustra, at the start of those spoke, Zarathustra is the same thing. Muhammad, before he created Islam, before he created the Muslim religion, went into a cave, spent a lot of time by himself, spoke with, I believe, Gabriel, spoke with the angels, got the Torah. No, not the Torah, fucking the Quran. And brought it back to the people and said, this is God's word. And like, what happened in there? Did he start with those really basic, boring, and I said before, the shadow was actually not scary at the start, it's boring. Did he start with those boring things where he was like humbly dealing with his emotions, and then he started getting to the more scary stuff where he's humbly dealing with like his fears, and then did he parse through that and start to see through the illusion? Then did he start to see the gods? And did he integrate his anger, the source of his fear, the source of his anger, the source of his desire, all of these things, that he sucked them in? And did he eventually go up to the highest level and reach the Godhead itself, Allah? And did Allah say, this is what you need to do, sir, to carry forward the destiny of humanity? And you're like, wow, like considering that all the major religions are premised on individuals that did this, Buddha being one, like, and it's a big idea, dude. Big idea. And
it's just reflected in individuation. Individuation is the myth for the modern man. It's the same thing, just articulated in your own life.
And the biggest idea of all is that Jung is suggesting that these archetypes, these pagan gods, these forces that exist in this collective imagination are autonomous. They are functioning like they're separate than us, and everybody can access them no matter what they're made of, because they're almost like fundamental parts of the universe. Astounding idea. Really hard to get your head around. So it's something very interesting. It's like it's all there for you, and you can go have a relationship with them if you just get over yourself.
Yep. I mean, we can't even go any further than that, because it becomes almost too cool. We'll just start throwing our biases into it. So it's like, we shall press on with a little bit of
yes.
Though the effects of anima and animus can be made conscious, they themselves are factors transcending consciousness and beyond the reach of perception and volition. Hence, they remain autonomous despite the integration of their contents, and for this reason they should be borne constantly in mind. This is extremely important for the therapeutic standpoint, because constant observation pays the unconscious a tribute that more or less guarantees its cooperation. Oh, wow. The unconscious, as we know, can never be done with once and for all. It is, in fact, one of the most important tasks of psychic hygiene to pay continual attention to the symptomatology of unconscious contents and processes, for the good reason that the conscious mind is always in danger of becoming one-sided, of keeping to well-worn paths and getting stuck in blind alleys. The complementary and compensating function of the unconscious ensures that these dangers, which are especially great in neurosis, can in some measure be avoided. It is only under ideal conditions, when life is still simple and unconscious enough to follow the serpentine path of instinct without hesitation of misgiving, that the compensation works with entire success. The more civilized, the more unconscious and complicated a man is, the less he is able to follow his instincts. His complicated living conditions and the influence of his environment are so fucking strong that they drown the quiet voice of nature. Opinions, beliefs, theories, and collective tendencies appear in its stead and back up all the aberrations of the conscious mind. Deliberate attention should then be given to the unconscious so that the compensation can set to work. Hence, it is especially important to picture the archetypes of the unconscious not as a rushing phantasmagoria of fugitive images, but as constant autonomous factors, which indeed they are.
Yes, Jung. Come on, Carl.
So beautiful. Have you got any
Dropping red.
thoughts? Have you got any thoughts on this, sir?
Oh,
I'm sure
like
you
loads,
do.
loads of things, loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of thoughts. But like, I guess I mapped it out for the sake of time. I guess like we can't really dig into it because we'll just beat the dead horse. But the idea is, of course, that I see Jung saying that look, if we want to be empirical and reductionist, pretend these things are real, and not like there's some weird images that people are getting fascinated. Pretend that these sort of like extra hidden, invisible forces that make up the psyche that everybody so much shares, and that the goal is to get people in touch with them. They're the source of the instincts, and he's obviously suggesting that they are, in fact, these functions. This is what they are in reality. But he's saying if you can't handle that, just pretend they are. And this is the whole process of unconsciousness. And when you don't do that, what happens is these forces control you. It's Jung's very powerful idea where he says, if you do not make what is unconscious, the gods, conscious, they will drive your life and you will call them fate. That's why we look at the gods almost as if they are the creators of fate, the forces that drive our life, destiny in many ways. The gods almost always possess destiny. And what that would manifest as is, as Jung says here, opinions, beliefs, theories, and collective tendencies appear in its stead. So say you haven't dealt with the masculine force, say you haven't gone through the shadow work with your father and dealt with the masculine force that dominates all of us, and you're a woman, you will get possessed by the god of masculinity that's dominant in this age, and that would be the feminist god. Strangely, you'll get possessed by whatever pagan influence is going on up in there, this archetype that is alive in there. Maybe it might even be the bitter old woman, or it could be the weak man or something like that, or maybe the evil Harvey Weinstein man or something like that. And so there's like these giant forces, until if you don't clear them up, you'll get attached to them and they will take control of you. And the way to take yourself away from them is to do the work yourself, do the inner work, and then you can actually visit them and have a real relationship with them, and see them for what they are and see the nuance inside of them. Like if you start studying conspiracy theories, for example, and you are very resentful towards successful people, or very resentful towards yourself, or just generally paranoid about life, or worried about the future or something like that, you'll very easily get sucked into a rabbit hole that will become very unproductive, because you won't be dealing with the conspiracy as what it is. You'll be dealing with a cathartic narrative to explain to you why you're a failure or something like that. So there's always that worry. But the problem is that you need to look into these things, because there is definitely truth behind some conspiracy theories, but you will never be able to see it properly until you've dealt with yourself. So that's why people always push that onus and say, clean your fucking room before you get into the conspiracy theories, that type of idea. You need to do the work first before you can deal with it, because these things are real, but you need to do the work first. That's the really important thing.
Yeah, I want to have a quick note on the conspiracy theory thing, I guess.
Oh, yes.
How many conspiracy... I'm asked the viewer a rhetorical question because they can't answer me. How many conspiracy theorists do you know that are psychologically healthy? And that's not a value judgment on the conspiracy theory and wanting to investigate things which are beyond the projections, we'll say, or beyond the veil, right? Not Anima projections, but beyond the veil. That's not a comment on that. It's a comment on what the hell makes you think you're psychologically healthy enough to be able to go into that and come out with the rational nugget. Because most conspiracy theorists, they'll begin with one particular line of inquiry, and then they'll go, and then they'll all come out roughly with the same worldview, and they're like, I know everything, and this is the way things are. It's like, so Stefan, when you and I deal with conspiracy theories, like we do all the time, partly for fun, it's like a psychological exercise, but we do it together. And one of the reasons of that is like you have two minds constantly fighting each other,
Yeah,
And it's like, you don't get caught up in your own bollocks. Like, I am the wisest of all the wise men, and
I
this is the
figured it
way the
out.
world is. It's like, no, it's like, I'll shut you down, you shut me down. What is actually true here? You know, it's one of those ideas. That's just an example of, before you go and investigate things, you're going to be so caught up in your own unconscious bollocks, your own instincts, which is what Jung said here. It's like, people say follow your instincts, and it's like, life's too complicated for that now. So you don't follow your instincts. Like, maybe back in the past, when our biggest danger was being eaten by a lion, we wouldn't have to deal with all of this stuff. But these days, it's far more complicated than that. It's you need to go in and sort yourself out. And and this is one of the hardest things to sort of comprehend, is like, the consequences of not doing that is the destruction of the world. and and it's like, you think
How selfish could you be, you fuck?
it's like, you think I'm joking. It's like, no, the destruction of the world. Like, history is the story, more or less, of a set of great individuals. Great, not necessarily meaning good or bad, but great as in they achieved certain things. It's usually a collective of a small number of individuals. And it's like, you know, if you're not psychologically healthy, if you aren't oriented properly, bye world, bye you, bye all your hopes and dreams. And it's like, most of the people you see around you, like most of the people who get into the red pill, or whatever version of that, it's like, they're not psychologically healthy enough to actually deal with the truth. It's like, it's following a particular instinct led by resentment and anima projections onto the world, which are causing them to go into a particular rabbit hole. And if the rabbit hole is clustered by a lot of people, that becomes like a dot in sort of the collective imagination. And it's like, investigating that and untangling things properly will actually reveal the truth, because there'll be like a nugget and you can go, oh, that's a little piece of truth. But otherwise, it's just a lot of resentful people with the same problems that have happened to them, informed by the collective imagination, localizing on a particular dot. It's like, you gotta start with yourself. It's like, Peterson gets a whole lot of shit for saying clean your room, but he doesn't mean clean your room. He means clean your internal room, your psychological space as such. You know, it's like, that's the most important thing for you to do.
And it's not obvious that, like, when you clean your room, it's not like in many ways you're cleaning your inner room, you know? Like, man, it's just so profound.
It's not obvious. I still can't do that.
You'll get it. What's his face? Two things I'd love to say about that is, one, Jung said that when he traveled to Africa and spoke to the locals, Jung's actually quite a boyo. Like, he used to rock down to Africa and hang out with the tribes and talk to them about dreams and stuff like that. And they said that they always used to look at him and be like, what the fuck is this guy? Like some German with a pipe talking about dreams and asking them why they worship the sun. But he said that the Africans, because they didn't have a sophisticated monotheism at that point, they were still in paganism, essentially. What's so funny is Europe's going back to that now, but starting to go back to that now. But anyway, the Africans were engaging in that. And what they do, Jung said, was they would project these internal figures, these internal psychic realities, onto the patterns that were happening in the world. So when the self would come up, the deep image of themselves, they'd see it in the sun. And so that's why they'd worship the sun. And it was literally instinctive. It was almost unquestioned. And in the lion, they would see their anger, you know, they would see the character of the lazy guy who's a super big, juicy alpha male and doesn't really have to work as much as everyone else. And in the woman, they would see desire for life and all that. And so it was very, very basic. And they would worship the goddess in her and stuff like that. And it was very, very the environment and the person was very much not separate. And what Jung noticed is that these guys are actually incredibly psychically healthy. What's so crazy is that these people, because they had integrated all of this stuff properly, they were incredibly in tune and incredibly sharp and just they were, like, everything was all right in that type of sense. But they didn't have that extra step, which was advanced institutions that were rationalizing, and so they couldn't build advanced civilizations and institutions and whatnot. But the consequence of building advanced civilizations is that you have to pull yourself out of that unconsciousness, and you can become divorced from those instincts. You can almost ignore them, and so then they start to like fuck with you, and that's exactly what goes on in the modern world. Is you have all these instincts that are boiling underneath you, and you start reading about the rational, the logos of the conspiracy theory, and then the instinct leaps out and grabs onto it. You know, the Aries does, and says they're out to get us. We got to do that. Or another really good example is the red pill stuff. So you've got women, and then you might get dumped, and you read the red pill stuff, and it says all women are hypergamous. All women go for the best man. All women are evil, and then your resentment towards getting dumped jumps out and grabs onto it, and you start firing that negative energy onto women, being like, they're such horrible bitches, never trust them at all. And you never obviously read Nietzsche's idea that like the problem with modern men and modern women is that there's no man enough to bring the woman out of woman. And it's that type of idea of, it's because we've got divorced from our deep instincts, because they're no longer attached to our environments. Our environments are quite abstract now. It's the onus is actually on us to bring those instincts to life, bring those instincts to consciousness, and then they will start to help us, or at the very least stop being in our way. We can adapt them to reality a lot better and remove the projection side of it and make it a lot more integrated, as he describes. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I want to throw one last thing about red pill, and this isn't me attacking the red pill either, because I just think it's pop evolutionary psychology. But what happens is people who become obsessed with a particular, and that's the word, obsessed with a particular idea, they hold it as like a life philosophy. So you have people identifying with the idea. So it's like, say, most people who are on like the subreddits with the red pill identify as red pilled men, and they almost hold that as like an obsession. It's like, that's very interesting. And what Jung spoke about before is the ego is held captive by the anima, essentially. It's like in the man in this instance, the ego is held captive. It's fascinated by it. So, it becomes this particular obsession. It's one of those ideas. It's like, you can hate people. Like I might hate Stefan, for example, just because he's he's a huge piece of human shit. And it's like, but then I'll hate him and then move on. It's just like or someone has the opposite of my values. I'm like, I really don't like you, but c'est la vie. But there's a difference between that and obsessing over the person. It's when that obsession comes in, you can start to recognize, oh, hang on. Maybe the reason why I'm hating and reacting so obsessively and emotionally about this is not because they are actually as I think they are. It's because of the projection that I've been put onto them. And it's like we could red pill the red pillars through this.
Yes, quite. On a quick note on that before we move on, Jesus, we're going in many rabbit holes here. Something I noticed then is that when you do that process properly, it gives you an immense power, first of all, over yourself, but also in order to influence people. Conor McGregor would often say that the reason why he was so good at getting inside people's heads is because he would literally meditate on what would get inside his own head. Something that's a paraphrase now, but he would say something along those lines, is that he would think about what would intimidate and scare him. And he would reuse what was damaging to him on other people. So like, he obviously didn't like when boyos would always be in his face challenging him. So he started doing that, and people would crumble because it's just so intense when someone's like that. And there's a very interesting idea, is that he strikes me as someone who really dug into himself. He seems really introspective, and it seems the immense amount of popularity and power he got was probably from doing that. It was probably from doing that, and it seems like he's lost it a little bit recently, so he's not as interesting as he once was. It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a very conscious thing to do. In Peterson's biblical lectures, I'm not giving him credit for this necessarily, because I don't know if he came up with this, probably not. But it's Adam and Eve, when they opened their eyes, they suddenly had to cover themselves up. And the reading of that is that as you open your eyes, i.e. become more conscious, as we've been talking about here, you suddenly become aware, as you were saying with Conor McGregor, of the things that can hurt other people. And so you recognize that you're vulnerable yourself. It's like you can switch. You can start with either one, like what hurts other people or vulnerable yourself. But that which actually ends up being reality and can serve you is a consequence of becoming more conscious, which is that introspection process, as you were saying. Recognize the projection making factors. But shall we press on, sir?
James, please continue, sir.
Cool. So paragraph 41, my beautiful fans out there in the world. Both these archetypes, as practical experience shows, possess a fatality that can on occasion produce tragic results. They are quite literally the father and mother of all the disastrous entanglements of fate, and have long been recognized as such by the whole world. Together they form a divine pair, one of whom, in accordance with his logos nature, is categorized by pneuma and nu, rather like Hermes with his ever-shifting hues, while the other, in accordance with her eros nature, I have to pronounce that eros, I don't know why, wears the features of Aphrodite, Helen, Persephone, and Hecate. Both of them are unconscious powers, gods, in fact, as the ancient world quite rightly conceived them to be. To
Boom.
call them by this name is to give them that central position in the scale of psychological values which has always been theirs, whether consciously acknowledged or not, for their power grows in proportion to the degree that they remain unconscious. Those who do not see them are in their hands, just as a typhus epidemic flourishes best when its source is undiscovered. Even in Christianity, the divine syzygy has not become obsolete, but occupies the highest place as Christ and his bride, the church. Parallels like these prove extremely helpful in our attempts to find the right criterion for gauging the significance of these two archetypes. What we can discover about them from the conscious side is so slight as to be imperceptible. It is only when we throw light into the dark depths of the psyche and explore the strange and tortuous paths of human fate that it gradually becomes clear to us how immense is the influence wielded by these two factors that complement our conscious life. It almost sounds like to me there that Jung, midway through writing the paragraph, became aware of an anima projection, and like he started to write how much he didn't like it very much. You know, he almost doesn't sound particularly. You compare them to a typhus epidemic, for example. It's like
it's like this is where we start getting into the mass psychology side of things, because we're dealing with the personal stuff a lot, and the onus is that you need to do an incredible amount of personal work. But funnily enough, people don't give a shit for that. They prefer hearing about the grand movements and whatnot. And I think what Jung says when he uses metaphors like disease and all that is that the idea of a collective getting possessed by a god. So in many ways, what's driving human fate isn't in essence rational thinking. This is a very hard idea to get our head around. It's not like history is decided by, clean thoughts and like, us making plans and them coming through. It's almost like we are dealing with this massive churning monstrous beehive, and if this beehive gets possessed by a collective feeling, it's going to go zoom in that direction. And this is what happened, for example, with the French Revolution in many people's eyes, is that there was this discontent seeded towards the aristocrats, and it was fed by the intellectuals. They're like, oh, those feckin' aristocrats. And then what happened is that energy boiled and boiled and boiled, and then suddenly a large amount of people got possessed by the god, which would have been the god of rebellion. Like that could even be a Lucifer, if you will, or a combination of Ares and Lucifer or something like that. And they went around, it was monstrous what happened. Like they went around, they executed their monarchs, man. They guillotined the people who were their kings. It's so crazy. Like imagine if the Americans just got up and killed Trump. Like imagine if the Americans got up and they went into the cabinet, the Congress, and they took out all the Republicans and brought them out into the street with an axe and cut their fucking heads off. Could you imagine that? That would be utterly insane. The same with the idea of England or something like that. Like imagine if they rose up against the Labour cabinet and took them out. And exactly what's happening with Macron right now. Like there's that, they're getting possessed by some type of energy, and it's almost sub-rational. Like there's reason pasted over it, but it's very sub-rational. And so it's very interesting of that idea of getting caught by it. And Jung would meditate on this a lot, being like, like I'm not sure if you even say how would you stop it, but it's almost like these forces, the gods, as they try to work themselves out, as the feminine energy tries to balance itself out compared to the masculine energy, as the force of the people and their desire for freedom tries to balance itself out, tries to compete against the force of the aristocrats and their desire for control. You see, it's almost like we're the cannon fodder of history in a weird way. Like it's not like the memes are the ones who are fighting the war in heaven, and we literally die for the memes. Like if you think of the idea of a nation, like if you think of the idea of World War I, all that was happening was you had the French and the English who were possessed by this idea, and they were fighting against the Germans who were possessed by another idea, and millions of people died for the sake of just an idea and the boundaries, like the borders around those ideas. It's a very, very crazy thought.
Yes, there's so Jung thought that World War One was a result, and this is a terrifying idea, was a result of the German collective psyche being possessed by Wotan or Odin.
Yes.
That's what he believed, and it's like that's a fascinating idea. So I've often thought, and this is entering into hypothesis territory. It's like I've often thought, how is it that human psyches can collect together under almost some kind of communication? And this is going to get kind of weird, but so I'm a biologist in my day job, and there's a phenomenon which recently, and by that I mean like 10 years, discovered called quorum sensing. So it happens with microorganisms, so bacteria. So if you grow bacteria on a plate, you get little I'm sure everyone's seen it. You get a little petri dish. You get little colonies of bacteria, little dots. And I've always wondered, like, well, why do they form like specific little colonies? You know, it's like so the bacteria will start to grow and divide, and they'll get to a particular size, then they'll stop. And that size seems to be perfect for not starving them, so that the food is too distributed amongst the cells, and also enough for genetic variability, so that if an antibiotic comes along, some of them will be able to survive and create a new one. So it's almost like it hits like a perfect size. And they only discovered that fairly recently in something called quorum sensing. So bacteria can talk to each other. They're like when it reaches when the population of cells reaches a certain amount, the sheer amount of a particular chemical that is secreted by each cell reaches a certain amount, so that it signals to all of them, stop dividing. Wow. So that's a fascinating idea. It's like they're talking to each other. So how does that happen with human beings? It's like we obviously don't secrete some kind of chemical, as far as we're aware, that enables us to all sort of sync up together. So it's like, what could it be? And there are two I'm thinking of. One is simply the spoken word, which actually is probably the most likely. Almost the logos idea, the actual spoken
I would say dreams.
Word. So dreams perhaps, but then how they link up to each other is interesting. But it's like maybe our words actually mean something, and they because we don't know what the true nature of consciousness is, and we don't know how it actually crafts the world. We don't know, for example, if the world will still exist if there was no consciousness, because we will always have consciousness to observe the world. One of those ideas. So it's like, are there bits of the psyche that unconsciously overlap with one another? We know we can do mind reading on people. So if you have a machine on somebody's head, you can intercept the brain waves, and you can actually read people's thoughts. So it's like maybe in the consciousness space, which we can't perceive through science, just purely through the limits of our technology at the current time, maybe things are leaching over to each other. It's a fascinating idea how everyone could be possessed by the same thought. You know, was everyone in World War II or everyone in the German possessed by Nazism? Was that a consequence of Hitler's spoken word?
Yeah, like, definitely.
Yeah, or was it something that the German people, over the course of a long period of time, were, through the result of the Treaty of Versailles, a particular element of the collective unconscious in all of them, who was woke to the Treaty of Versailles, will say, come up and evolve and merge into one between them, and then through the spoken word that was reinforced. You know, that's just hypothesis territory. I've been thinking about that an awful lot recently, and it's like,
yeah, so
what is our spoken word actually doing to each other?
Yeah, this is interesting. See, my idea would be that the spoken word would create the dream. It's not that the spoken word would create the image. It speaks to the imagination. Hitler's a very talented public speaker, very passionate, but very, very descriptive. You notice that a lot of what he would say would be very straightforward. He had a very particular style. And you notice in a lot of his speeches that he's really crafting a dream. And the dream revolves around these ideals of the German people. It's like, you can imagine if the Germans went out and fought World War I and got beaten up, and then they were lying there in the corner and they're covered in bruises and whatnot. Hitler was almost like the coach in the corner who started just roaring motivational stuff into his head. But it was like, well, what would you say to someone at that point? You wouldn't tell them technical stuff. You would scream to them, like, fight for, it's like Rocky. It's like, fight for Adrian, fight for your woman. And fight for your people, fight for the Italians or something like that. And you kind of like bring them up like that. And these deep concepts would trigger something deep inside them and revivify them in that type of way. And Hitler's particular dream is very interesting because it had a very powerful heroic narrative for the German people, which they were stripped of. And it was centered around this idea that there was a parasitic force that was the communists and even the New World Order that was trying to steal that from them. And that they had to fight to maintain their place in the world and resist this attempt to close in on them and stamp them out. and that was the dream, and that's a very compelling dream because that gives a very clear evil and a very clear good.
Yeah, I just want to throw in there briefly music, the idea of music and how that might inform the collective dream. Maybe the national anthem of a particular country is actually what, in some ways, it depends how patriotic the country is, obviously, but that actually informs part of that collective dream. It's like whatever the culture is like at the time, literally. So it literally influences you. But I'm always curious as to where that dream exists. If it's in me and in you at the same time, does that actually mean it's in me and you, or are we the same person to some degree? Do you know what I mean? Not that we share the same biological substructure, but like it would be reasonable to conclude that there's a piece of me in you and a piece of you in me. That you know, even talking to each other, it's there's some kind of psychic overlapping here. And I'm not being esoteric with it either. It's like any kind of flowery language is only because we don't have the technical language to describe it yet.
Well, me and you would both want to be heroes, you know? We'd both want to feel that we're part of a heroic nation. We can put it that way. We both want to have meaningful lives. And so if someone came along to me and you and said, I will revive Albion and I will make you knights of the great Albion Empire, that would probably trigger both of us. But interestingly, though, there would be a difference between us. Like people would have to lean a lot more in the Gaelic side for me. And they'd obviously, because the cultural context is different, whereas for you, people would have to lean a lot more in the noble British Empire. And so the story has to change somewhat. But once you get a certain group of people, the story can be very straightforward and simple, and you can unite them. And your skill as an orator or as a persuader would depend on how many people you can capture under the one story. Like that would be the idea of what Trump was doing. Trump was over there in the States and he was like, make America great again. It's a very simple idea and it captures enough people for him to be successful. It's so low resolution that it gets enough people. It's perfect propaganda. Same with Hitler, and same with someone who was like wanted to speak to the Irish people. They might say something like, revive the Gaelic stuff, you know, revive Fionn McCool or something like that. And or if they wanted to unite us, it would be Albion, as I said. And so that would be the instinct in us is for the heroic narrative and the great meaningful kingdom, the quest. It's very simple. And you just need to paint the correct cultural context on that. Like I couldn't turn around to you and say, like, it's weird that like we're so obsessed with Zion and Israel and the Middle East as like the center of God, like the Crusaders were, because that's really funny when you think about it, because then everybody's mind focused on Jerusalem. They've focused on the Middle East, and that's the picture that they painted. But that's the thing that united all of Europe. It was with that we could focus on. We could together focus on it, on Jerusalem. We could together have one kingdom that represented all of Christianity against the Muslims or something like that. It's really, really interesting. But if we went back to Ireland and England and said, you know, if I told you let's make Dublin great again, you'd be like, yeah, dude, fuck off. Like I'm not bothered. But then if you told me let's make London great again, I'm like, no, I don't like that either. Last time that happened, that involved slavery. Like what the fuck?
But all we have to do is take over Southern Ireland, and then we can unite them all together. How about that?
I think what's going to happen is we're going to take over you, and then we're going to take over Germany, and then France, and it'll be all good.
Yes, with you at the helm, the dream reading bard, leading the way.
Finally, James, you've articulated it. That's my plan all along. People, get on board. Sign up to the email list below. We will start this soon.
Yes, it's a military sign up. It's basically what you're doing. Second,
and I will get all your details.
Number, don't do it.
I will get all your details and dox you if you don't stick with me. So you're in.
There's something interesting there. Is like it proves that we live in the world as if it's a story and a narrative type structure, which is fascinating. It's like, even we'll take Ben Shapiro as an example, like facts. It's like it's still not quite true, because through saying that facts don't care about your feelings creates a hierarchy of facts above feelings, and then with that you have the people who operate in facts are better in some capacity or in some relevant capacity than those who operate with feelings. And then the narrative becomes almost like an intellectual one and a cognitive capacity one, where it's like a battleground is almost formed. So it's even saying facts. It's like the idea of the will to truth. And this was one of Nietzsche's observations. He's like, we don't know where the will to truth comes from. So that he actually like attacked scientists or whatever. It wasn't quite scientists in the 1800s. It was almost there. But it was like, even scientists have like a faith that underpins things, because it's like, well, they're like, we're rational and we want truth, and he's like, well, where does that will to truth come from? You have the presupposition that truth is better than untruth, and with that you still weave the narrative structure of truth versus not truth. And it's almost like the false god and the real god battling it out, and it's like, oh, that's very interesting. So everything that we do follows some kind of story narrative, and I guess that is what people can unite under in some global sense. So I think we just riffed for like half an hour on that one paragraph. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh man, this stuff is gold, and there's so much I haven't even spoken about yet that I've got like noted down here. Like one idea that I wanted to bring up before we move on, people. So we're going to deviate off that. We got actually a fair few comments there. Jesus Christ, we got a lot of comments. Okay, we'll try to get through all of these. What's his face? One thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of projection and transsexualism, because that's definitely going to be a dodgy topic. Transsexuality, there you go. This is a hard thing to get around with the animus, but there is that sense of the eros, and you're trying to access the anima is femininity as experienced by men. So it's that burning feeling side of yourself that projects out and creates the projected reality that you see instead of showing you the real reality. It's the emotional side of things. And I get the feeling, as I said before, that if men are like soft, they may project out onto the goddess and want to access her, as they say. And this can cause a problem because guys can get so obsessed with if they're unconscious that this is what's going on, they don't deal with their feelings and realize that it's part of the process of maturing. They can deify their feelings and almost try to turn into their feelings in a weird way. So instead of going in and integrating their feelings and becoming part and helping that become part of themselves in order to make them more manly, like access their courage and stuff like that. Because Jung says that. He says when a man deals with his anima properly, it reinforces his masculinity. It makes him hyper masculine in many ways. It makes him heroic. And you become obsessed with your feelings. You deify them. You try to access the goddess through them. You can be liable to some projections, which I think Jung mentioned earlier, such as transsexuality and homosexuality. You can almost try to turn yourself into an effeminate man, if you know what I mean. And that is
you just dropped an interesting comment there, but yeah.
Well, what was the interesting comment?
Well, no, it's so Jung's opinion on homosexuality, which is one that people like to dust under the rug.
Is that not what he brought up earlier in this book? I remember, because I think that's what I was
under a particular guise. But that was brought up in the very early part of the Anima, where he thought that not necessarily all of homosexuality, but a large part of it was identification with the Anima.
That's what I'm trying to get at here. Yeah, I'm probably not explaining it that well, but the idea would be you deal with your psychological reality and you don't see yourself as a combination of logos and eros, you could say. You just see your feelings and say, that's what I am. And you deify them as the most important part of yourself. And you define your identity based on these. And that would lead you down the path of homosexuality and transsexuality, which is weird. It changes you in many ways. You become obsessed with this certain part of yourself, and it's actually a projection in some way. I'm not saying this is all people that way, but this is an interesting frame to take. And it's a psychological projection you're putting onto it. And often it's that problem is of that projection of focusing on that causes these type of weird identification problems. And I guess the reason why I'm trying to tie this into what we were talking about there earlier is that you can speak to people really powerfully if you can speak to their identity. So if you know that a lot of people are like, if homosexuality is a big deal, you'll find it very easy to speak to them if you understand that their identity is based around the values that very eros orientated people have. So you'll know that you'll need to speak about being nice and being acceptable and agreeable. And funnily enough, that's exactly how it works out in practice. And this is how I guess great orators would be able to communicate with large amounts of minds. It would be to signal, to see what is fundamentally at the soul of people, their identity, their core identity, and learning how to speak to them and somehow uniting them. Like, I think great orators on the left realize that women are more agreeable and more eros orientated, as are people who are like pro LGBT and all that stuff, pro homosexuality, transsexuality. So they can see that they can unify those two camps by speaking about acceptance and feeling. And some real genius aspects of the Democrats over in the States is that they realize that the minorities, the Black communities and the Hispanic communities can be spoken to in the sense of agreeableness, as if like accepting into society. You know, that seems to be the universalized theme among all these people to persuade all these people at once. So they push that value a lot, and it's so fucking smart. It's unbelievable, because all these people identify with that. They identify with that feeling outside of the white man society, and then they've got these people who are saying we accept, agree, let in, allow feelings, that type of things. Very, very powerful stuff. And then, yeah, I guess that's the best I'm going to do there. I was trying my best there.
Yeah. The homosexuality, transsexuality one is really interesting, because like if you, because I'm a biologist, I do this. It's like the literature on the biological cause of homosexuality is dismal. We don't know. We've got two main hypotheses. One of them is the male loving gene, and one of which is the gay uncle theory. You can Google those if you want to, but it's pretty dismal. The gay uncle theory, yeah, it's something along the line, and it's not very well articulated, but it's like most men would go off and into the world and fight, whereas some men would stay behind to look after children. So it was like an element of the more feminine men would be utilized to look after the children and things. So it's like a mix between the two of them. So I guess as a buffer in case they all died or something like that, which is really interesting. But the transsexual literature as well is like, we have no idea what causes that at all. There's barely any papers published at all on the biological cause of it. So we don't know. It's like, so maybe Jung was right, and the cause of these things is psychological, not biological. But I guess the modern hypothesis is that psychology is a direct product of biology. So it could be that, I don't actually know if he called homosexuality a neurosis. He might have done, but the idea is that there are variations in human psychology, and it's rooted within the anima and animus projections. Like the gods are causing you to go this certain way. It's like, that's a very interesting thing to do. And before people get, not our audience, because they seem to be more they seem to be more aligned with this, they're more open-minded to this type of thing. It's like, in no way is that a value judgment either. It's just purely playing with the potential causes of certain ideas, which I just find very interesting. Did you have anything else to say on that particular paragraph?
I have a massive thing to say on the homosexuality thing, actually, because this is what I was trying to riff into as well, is getting into big ideas. So you have that eros thing where it's trying to pull you into your feelings, your emotions. And then you have the problem where you can become obsessed with that eros and then flow into like transsexuality, or just being effeminate, being a soy boy, or even homosexuality or something like that. And it's not like that straightforward. You have crazy homosexuals like Milo, and then other types of homosexuals like Peter Thiel, who are just like based as fuck. So you don't really know what's going on at all. But nonetheless, there's these weird psychological realities going on there. But then Jung also said something interesting, that it's through the anima that most men will never get past the anima, and the anima is usually the place where they will find God, or the closest experience they'll have to God. And I thought this was interesting because we have a super masculine religion like Islam, which is focused on the idea of Allah being the single God, and Islam is like quite not like unfeminine. Let's put it that way. It's like restrictive on the feminine instinct altogether. But Islam fundamentally means submit, and submitting is quite a feminine idea. You've got the dominant submission dichotomy, and so Islam itself is this idea of giving in to the higher power. It's submitting almost effeminately to the higher power, and it's through that process of submitting that they, I guess, in many ways, touch on that eros side, or the feminine or the anima side of the psychology that needs to be realized. They need to kind of like press on that idea of total feminine submission to the total masculine force, and the masculine force will guide them. And it's a very, very strange psychological play, what's going on inside that religion. And that is that idea of the ego wanting to submit to God, or reality even, and whatnot. I find that damn fascinating. I don't really know what to make of it at all, but I think there's something there. This idea of maybe homosexuality is an attempt to submit to reality or a higher power or something. I don't really know. And they do it sexually, whereas people like in religions like Islam and even Christianity do it more in a abstract way, but they're still fulfilling the psychological whole, or the psychological energy, which is the anima. And it just goes to show you how powerful this monster is inside our minds.
Yeah, I wonder what the overplay is between, again, on sort of the World War One being caused by a collective dream. I wonder if this, you could say the same thing about homosexuality, because it's basically psychological infertility in one of its means, right? It's because homosexuals won't go and procreate. So maybe it's a population control mechanism done via the collective psyche. It's like so it's like the quorum sensing idea. You reach a certain size, so it's like, because homosexuality, the incidence has risen over the last little while, and
it's mad, isn't it?
Yeah, the more lefty types, I suppose, the more inclusive types will say that's because more people are coming out of the closet, right? We're more accepting. So it was always this level, people are more accepting. So I find it very hard to believe that 10% of people will be some variant of LGBT, whatever. So in other words, psychologically infertile. It's like, and that's, again, no value judgment on that. That's just the reality of what it is. It's like, that's a very interesting phenomenon. Wow. Now, of course, you could say dodgy hormones in the water supply, which are causing, people to more people than normal to go a certain way, whatever. But it's just fun ideas to think about.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I guess like it is a rabbit hole that's definitely worth exploring. But we'd have to probably sit down with it a bit more to get it more articulate. I'd love to riff with you on the biology of this and see could I bang some of these Jungian ideas against them. But James, we've deviated. Deviance is the topic of the day. Let's go into the final paragraph and we'll wrap this up. We got loads of questions, so we'll see if we can answer a few.
I'll get through this. So this is the last paragraph of Anima and Animus. In the new year, in the next section, we're moving on to the real meat of this book, which is the self. Obviously, Aion, the self. So I'm very excited to move on to the next bit, but we'll just wrap this up. Recapitulating, my fine friends, I should like to emphasize that the integration of the shadow, or the realization of the personal unconscious, marks the first stage in the analytic process, and that without it, a recognition of Anima and Animus is impossible. The shadow can be realized only through relation to a partner, and Anima and Animus only through relation to a partner of the opposite sex, because only in such a relationship do their projections become operative. The recognition of the anima gives rise in a man to a triad, 1/3 of which is transcendent: the masculine subject, the opposing feminine subject, and the transcendent anima. With a woman, the situation is reversed. The missing 4th element that would make the triad a quaternity is, in man, the archetype of the wise old man, which I have not discussed here, and in a woman, the chthonic mother. These 4 constitute a half-immanent and half-transcendent quaternity, an archetype which I have called the marriage quaternio. The marriage quaternio, people, is talked about a shit ton in the rest of the book. So the marriage quaternio provides a schema not only for the self, but also for the structure of primitive society, with its cross-cousin marriage, marriage class, and the division of settlements into quarters. The self, on the other hand, is a God image, or at least cannot be distinguished from one. Of this, the early Christian spirit was not ignorant. Otherwise, Clement of Alexandria could never have said that he who knows himself knows God.
Damn.
The quaternio, the 4 symbols, comes up constantly throughout Christian mythology in general, but Christian mythology. It's that one of my favorite images is Jesus in the center of it, who's like the self, and you've got the 4. It's like the 4 canonical New Testament Gospels. It's like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they form the marriage quaternio, and it's like very, very, very important psychologically.
And Jung always would frame the idea of the 4 being a harmonized, balanced, self-like set of numbers. 4 is very, very based, very, very settled, very, very, very grounded, but also very complete, very, very nuanced, very diverse. Something like 3, Trinity, being this sort of anima man woman, or animus woman man situation, is unbalanced but very fertile. It's a very powerful one. It's the 2 creating the 1. And so these numbers actually play a huge deal in his archetype of the self, or the unconscious, and in your ability to move forward in your individuation process. It's very useful to understand the way he's using these, shall we say, mathematics in order to make these constructions and whatnot. There's a lot to say in this.
I just quickly throw out, just while it's on my mind, when people first start getting to the idea of the collective unconscious, I know I did, and lots of people do. There are loads of questions on Quora and Yahoo Answers, whoever the hell uses those websites, I don't know. And they always ask, what are Jung's archetypes? What's the list of them? Can you give me a list? And so people generally go down the more pop. It's corrupt in some way, and they go, well, you've got the warrior, and you've got the king, and you've got the this and the that and the this and the that. You know, all the way down to, you know, they not technically the archetypes as Jung was talking about. It's like the higher archetypes are, you know, the shadow, anima, animus, wise old man, chthonic mother, the self. They're like the main things that you need to contend with. The others are like the higher archetypes mapped onto something else. So King, Warrior, Magician, Lover is a very popular Jungian book. They don't actually exist in the collective unconscious. They're reflections of the higher archetypes, we'll say.
Yeah, that's really hard to get your head around, and most people, like, dealing with these really high level things it's not how you actually experience them. Like, most people aren't going to, you know, experience God straight up, or the anima straight up. It's going to be a lot more like you will see this character in your dreams, or you'll take an LSD trip and get visited by the weirdest knight dressed up and with a British accent, and it will like be these specific experiences because they're manifesting out of this hidden world. And that's what's so profound about it, is Jung is suggesting that this hidden world is actually real, and these things live separate to us, and they actually influence us in the most profound way.
Again, have I told my vision from God on these?
I don't think you have. Series? Tell me, sir.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, I wasn't under the influence of any drugs, but it was a really, really tough psychological time for me, and I was visited by, we'll say, spirits. I've talked about this with a few people behind the scenes, and they've really helped me sort of work this out. But the main character was this green goddess type character. And I was sitting in the room with my fiance, and she was seeing me talking to the wall with tears streaming down my face. It was like having a full-on mental breakdown. James, what the hell is going on? And wow. and I was talking to this green goddess, and she was telling me, in most of the time it was purely articulate, but also symbolically, all the ways in which I was fucking up in my life. And then what happened is this green goddess, a part of her flew over and inhabited my fiance. So it was like she was like a specific manifestation of this goddess, which is obviously the anima, right? It's a visitation, it's a vision by the anima. It's like almost like active imagination caused by psychological stress. And then another character that turned up was as far as I'm aware, it was Richard the Lionheart as like an idea in my mind. Not Richard the Lionheart, the man. Just like it's not the father, it's the image of the father. You know, it's the father as such. It was like that. It was Richard the Lionheart as such. And the hinting that I got was, once you sort out all of this shit that you're doing wrong, you know, and there was a whole bunch of things. It was like something like respect the feminine, which is interesting. Stop lying was another one. Respect unconsciousness was another one. I'm like, what the fuck is all this mean? Why are you telling me this? The hinting was, you can then become this. I was like, fuck me. And that floored me for about a month. Wow. I was like, I cannot get over that. It's like, as far as I'm aware, I was not under the influence of any drug. As far as I'm aware, you know, but things can happen, and even then it wouldn't dull it. But it's like, it's exactly what the hell is being described in this. It's like you're talking to the anima, and through doing as the anima, you know, through taking up the challenges the anima has set before you, by not seeing them as projection. Yes, not seeing them as, by seeing them as projections, you're able to transcend up into the more hero-like state.
Wow.
And it's like that I was like, fuck.
That is so crazy. That's so crystal clear and articulate for like waking life. That's like a little bit of a breakthrough. Jesus Christ, dude. That's awesome. I've never had anything that clear just being normally conscious. Like, I've had to take drugs in order to get that experience, or do dream reading. I'd find them through derivatively from dreams. So that's amazing, man. And it's so lucid and straightforward. That's so profound. Holy shit.
Yeah, as I was saying, it completely floored me for about a month. I was like, I don't know what to make of this. And I have a friend who's involved in like occult stuff, and he was playing around with some occult stuff with me, and he was like confirming everything, like absolutely everything. And it was like, it was like a prophecy. I consider it like a prophecy by my unconscious to be like, this is what you have to do if you want to become the hero. Like, well, yeah, sure. So it's that individuation process as such reflected in my own life.
So that's so mad. Yeah. Like, and I guess that's how it works, isn't it? Is it descends down from heaven and comes visits you and sends you on the right path.
Mm.
And this is what's interesting, is that there is this undercurrent ideal that it's a benevolent force, and there is obviously an evil force, but it's almost like these characters are fighting against it to some extent. Like, these characters want you to achieve your greatest form, and they're trying to help you. Now, you will come across the evil side at some point, but generally speaking, you're in good hands. It's an amazing thought. Like, it's an amazing thought.
Mm.
And so much in that. Like, uh sir, have you anything less to say, or should we go into the
No, I think that's the perfect way to end off this part of our 2018 portion of these lectures. It's ended perfectly on the self in the new year. I like that. I'm quite orderly.
what? That's mad. Love it, love it. All right, people, we're going to read some questions now. If you have any, be sure to drop them in. I cannot promise we will get to them all. There's a lot here. I will just read through them until we get some serious questions. Weeb Abu, polytheism can be boiled down to monotheism. Christianity is paganism. Thoughts?
I need more information before I can comment on that. I think it's an evolution from paganism. I don't think it is paganism. They're clearly not the same thing. But it seems to be that polytheism is lots of little ideals or lots of little forces, and then above them there is the most important, the most transcendent, which somewhat incorporates them all but stands above them all. It's like an evolution, more sophisticated version.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there is aspects, like, paganism is a bad word. Bad. It's a low resolution word. It's like paganism was a slur word that they used, the Christians used against people who didn't practice Christianity. In reality, Christianity is a more advanced form of polytheism in many ways. It's about unifying the idea that you only worship one God as most valuable. That's what monotheism is about, isn't it? And then that the derivative gods are merely servants to this super god, which is interesting, because then the idea behind paganism is more animistic. It's more that these gods possess power, but they're not centralized. It's more decentralized. It's a weird thought, actually. I still don't have my head straight about that.
I just really quickly on that. I met a guy who wants to baptize me. I walked to work, and he was obviously watching me for a while, and so he kept meeting me in the mornings. I was coming out of the gym before going to work. It's absolutely fascinating. He was like, "So I come from this particular church, and in my church we believe in God the Mother." I was like, "What in the fuck?" And it was like, "Well, read this." And he opened up a random passage from fucking like Revelation or something. It was talking about God's bride in the sky, which I presumed meant Israel, or something along those lines, a state. And he's like, no. God had a bride. God had an actual bride that was God the Mother. And in order to fully reach heaven, we have to worship God the Father and God the Mother. So almost in that, it's not a particularly major sect as far as I'm aware. This group of people, they've separated God the Father into two gods. It's like the masculine and the feminine. So it's almost the anima and animus rather than
I think that's what they're doing.
True God. Yeah, that's like, that's fat. I obviously didn't turn to him and was like, "So have you read Carl Jung's Aion?" We talk about the anima and animus on YouTube. It's youtube.com/StefanFox. I didn't do any of that, but that's fascinating what you're doing there. You're splitting the higher ideal into more easily articulated, smaller ideals. Similar idea.
And it's very interesting, because the Godhead, like for the Jews, maybe the Kabbalistic Jews, their idea was the tetragrammaton. I remember reading this in Alistair Crowley. It's abracadabra. It's the name Yahweh, and you're not supposed to ever say it. Jehovah. You're not supposed to say it. Like, the idea is that it's so abstract that you can't comprehend it properly, and you can only comprehend the lower ideals, and that's what the pagan gods are. So if you get caught up worshiping the lower gods, you're an idiot. And that's why you do stuff like sacrifice pigs and shit, because you're a fucking spastic who are worshiping lower gods. Instead, you should be focusing on the higher gods and admitting humbly and submitting to this higher god's super will that unites them all. It's a very crazy idea. I guess we'll get into this more with the self. Let's press on. So this is a quote from somewhere about the president Durete, which I believe is the president of the Philippines, and he's really crazy, and he calls Obama son of a bitch, for example. That's a type of character.
Oh, yes.
In the same speech, the president Duterte's triad did not just end with the Catholic Church, but extended to the Holy Trinity and Jesus Christ himself. He dismissed the Holy Trinity as silly and Jesus as unimpressive, as he chose to die on the cross rather than just zap to oblivion all his foes. This is from Coley Books. This is a mate of mine, actually. Thought this was relevant. Could have come from the mouth of Jung himself. So elegant.
Yes, that's I might have mentioned this before, but Isaac Newton belonged to a particular sect of Christians which didn't believe in the Holy Trinity as being one God. That's always a complicated thing that's divided Christians, is the Holy Trinity. So what the hell does that mean? How can they all be God at the same time? And Newton was part of this, I think it began with S, I can't remember the actual name of it, but who thought that Jesus was almost like a lower deity.
Yeah.
He didn't articulate it like that, but in practice it was like a lower deity who because he had to be begot by the Holy Spirit, there was a God before him, therefore he's somewhat distinct. So it's almost like, again, splitting that out into sort of two separate things. Sort of God the Father and God the Son, as like, you worship God the Father, not God the Son.
What's interesting is Jesus never, that's stupid. Jesus rarely referred to himself as the Son of God. He actually refers to himself as the Son of Man.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting idea, because what he seems to be suggesting there is that you have God, and God is somewhat creating mankind in this idea. Almost imagine God is trying to use mankind to create a Superman, an Ubermensch, God's own version of the Ubermensch. And so God has created man, and he's now trying to incubate out of man the best man of all, and that's what the Messiah would be. And so Jesus was walking around saying, I am the Son of Man, I am the final product of man, I am the Ubermensch in many ways, and so I am the realization of God's plan in many ways. I'm the perfect man. But that doesn't say that I'm God per se. It's almost saying, through me you can access God. Through me, you access the Father. Me and the Father are distinct. But then at the same time, I come from him in the same ways that we all come from our fathers. It's one of those paradoxes that we are separate but unified in some way. I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, so it's like you're not meant to worship Jesus. This was an alchemist's view. You're not meant to worship Jesus Christ. You're meant to almost act like Jesus Christ and worship the true God. Also, Son of Man is a very good song by Phil Collins from the Tarzan soundtrack.
Let's just end the feed there, people. Son of Man, Phil Collins. Bye-bye. Gone. Let's keep going, sir. Let's keep going. Christ was fully man and God according to theology. So I don't know if you can really apply him to everyone.
It depends what type of Christian you are.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why there's such a divide amongst Christian denominations. It's like, Christ is an ideal, but Christ is not God the Father. This is where the Trinity distinction comes from, which gets very confusing. It's like Christ is God, but he's distinct from God, and it's like it's the same thing as you, because you're also God, because you have a spark of divinity within you, but you're not God. You know, whereas a more Nietzschean idea, I suppose, is that you can become a God for all intents and purposes, and the Christians one is like, no, you can't. It's like you will never reach the perfection of Christ, but it's something to aim for.
Someone else in the comment brought up Luciferianism, so I'm gonna actually bring it in here. They say Luciferian Egypts are destroying our future. And so there's a few things we'll get into that. So that idea is interesting to juxtapose with the idea of Christ. Because both of these, I talked about collective dreams. Both of these dreams, both of these super ideals are Christ and Antichrist is the Christian way, are actually occupying a lot of our minds. And both of these are premised on the idea of we need a great leader or hero or Messiah in order to save us and bring us to the kingdom of God. Now, the question is, what is the kingdom of God and what will our heroes be like? So many people think on the Christian side that we need to submit to God's plan and allow God to do the work. We need to Deus vult. We need to allow his will to be enacted. So Christ is a demonstration from God that we should obey Christ, live like Christ, and then the kingdom of God will happen through him. So it's almost like be good people, and then you'll create the West, and then the West will somehow turn into the West of heaven of some sort. It's a more complicated theology than that, but it's submissive. It's the idea that we shouldn't try create the kingdom of God. We should try create the kingdom in ourselves, and the kingdom will manifest. That type of idea. It's very interesting. Whereas the Luciferian idea, to steelman it the best we can, is the idea that we have been deluded in waiting for God to save us. And what we need to do is take a proactive stance in this dream and actually work towards creating the great kingdom. Because if you look at what has happened in the last 200 years, we have dragged almost all of us out of poverty. And we have revolutionized our lifespans. We have revolutionized our potential. We have done amazing fucking things. And we have so much potential to create a kingdom where we live in sort of like a tech utopia of sorts. And so the idea is many of our restrictions are down to our fear of taking reality into our own hands. And what we need to do now is, like Lucifer, accept that perhaps the whole waiting for God thing, waiting for Godot, as Samuel Beckett said, is a delusional. And we need to instead embrace transhumanism and move forward as the Ubermenches and create the super world. And both of those involve the exact same architecture of the psyche. You have hell-like reality, Messiah that leads you to the kingdom. And on this side, you have Messiah being transgender, transhuman, Ubermensch. And in the future, and then the society is almost like a tech utopia of sorts. But on Christian, it's submit to God. And both of them revolve around the idea of God. Do we submit to God, or do we go against God? Do we take will into our own hands, or do we go against him? And many people see that the Luciferian idea is the one that's getting enacted in the modern world. It's the Faustian idea. That's what people are doing. That's what the elites are doing, if we will. Or that's what at least the collective unconscious has accepted that we're going to do. It could be either of those two possibilities. Nonetheless, that's what it seems to be enacting. And when you see some of the dark sides of the modern world, it's very, very easy for you to become jaded and think, oh fuck, these Luciferians are taking over shit. But are they doing it because they're evil, or are they doing it because they're deluded by this dream, just like everybody else gets deluded? It's really hard to know, but I do see those two distinct dreams fighting each other. And what's fascinating is this is Christ and this is Antichrist. But in this sense, this is Ubermensch and this is weak beta bitch. So it's these two things are going to fight, and it's almost like they're fighting for humanity's soul. And what's crazy is when we get into Aion, we will discover that's actually what Jung is saying should happen according to the astrology of it all, which is mad.
Yep. I would highly recommend every single person listening to this. There'll be a link in the description down below for both the UK and American copies. Get yourself a copy of Faust, Goethe's Faust, because exactly as you were saying, it's that Christ and Antichrist idea. And in many ways, there is Christ, like Jesus Christ, and then you also have this Dr. Faustus figure who doesn't really get much attention. It's almost unconscious in a way. We're unaware of it, but this is the opposite. So to try and unify those two things, as you were saying, is exactly what's going to be happening, or has already happened in the stars. We actually don't know yet. We don't know when the new Aeon's coming in yet. It might have already happened. It might happen. It could be 600 years from now, I think is the top estimate, but it could have happened in the 60s. So that's interesting. Everyone needs to, going forth, it'd be a good idea to get yourself a copy of Faust, so that when we touch Faust fairly soon in the book, you've caught up and you can be like, shit, I understand exactly what Jung's talking about now. That's why we push that down below, because it's essential to the story of Western civilization in this particular context. It's
all about money, guys. Don't listen to him. Like we just want.
We are selling our own versions of Faust. We've written our own version, and the link is down below. It's all yours.
Yes, it's a very important piece of knowledge to know. We'll keep tearing through these. There's still a lot of them. What is psychologically healthy? Jesus Christ! I'm going to let you handle that, my man.
What is psychologically healthy?
Yeah, I think that's rhetorical because we're talking about psychological health. So
that's actually a good question. That is actually a really good question. It's like the Myth of Mental Illness is like a psychological classic book. It's like, what is psychologically healthy? It's like Christ and Christianity, in many ways, the highest ideal is truth, capital T, truth. And it's why Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson's podcast was so powerful. It was almost like one version of truth versus another version of truth, and they were fighting each other, and they said it didn't go anywhere, but I think it was the most important conversation they've ever had. And it's like, whatever, or at least the hypothesis is, whatever serves the truth is healthy. Because in some ways you have to decide in your own mind. It'll happen unconsciously that some things are better than other things. You decide it all the time when you go. So it's like right now, after this, I'm going to go down and get some lunch. It's like I decide that going to get lunch is better than not getting lunch. So you have some kind of hierarchy. So you have to decide that for yourself. So in many ways, whatever mode of being, and your psychology is what you act out, more or less. It's a reflection of what's inside of you. You act it out. Whatever you act out should be serving the truth. That's psychologically healthy. So for example, psychological unhealthiness would be either ignoring your shadow or giving in to its projections, giving it or believing that the world is exactly what it is. The people in Plato's cave staring at the wall are psychologically unhealthy. The reason for that being is in that specific moment, it might be harmless, but you don't take a specific moment in time as existing in isolation for the rest of time. It's a passage of time, and it informs forward and backwards, and history is this long string of things. So it's like act in a way that best serves heaven, we'll say, that best serves the world in which you want to bring about.
Wow, it's such a profound idea. I'm actually not going to comment on it because I would.
Because you're psychologically unhealthy.
You fucking dick. I would literally go all the way to the bottom of the barrel, and
you'd be up till 5 a.m. talking about Satan again, weren't you?
That's Satan told me not to tell people what is psychologically healthy, because that would help too many people out, But I think you're right, though. It is about having your value system orientated towards reality, and it's almost it's about having. I actually think it's about having many of the positive emotions in place internally. It's like this idea of hope for like one of the main things I find is that hope is a really big deal of psychological health. Is that people need to believe that the world is a redeemable place, but that hope needs to be balanced with a darkness of sorts, and that people need to realize that the world is an evil place. So there needs to be that type of balance. They need to think, okay, I can achieve I can achieve a lot, maybe, or almost anything. I'm a very, very important, powerful being. Like, being a human is unbelievable. And the world really suits me. Like, if I really get in touch with who I am, I have a lot to offer, and the world is out to help me. But at the same time, I live in a place where lions and gazelles exist, and it's fucking tragic. And there's been every attempt to set me off my way. And in many ways, I actually am part of this great struggle against something monstrous. And I'm likely going to fail. And in the end, I'm going to die anyway. And it might all be meaningless, and it's tragic. And you need to like have this balance, but it's more like psychological health to me is more like a tension point between these two juxtapositions. Like I feel like I'm a very extroverted, boisterous boyo, like, and like I feel happy, and I like having fun and all that, but I do have like extremely sad and dark and tragic thoughts of being like, oh my God, like things are crushingly intense. And there's, I don't know, there's a beautiful tension there, there's something lovely about it's tragedy and comedy fundamentally. That's what I get it down. And I think having that in place is, I wouldn't say, what I'm trying to avoid here is saying happiness. I think it's more like a tension where you can deal with reality as it is. You can emotionally resonate with reality properly. And that actually involves being tragic and sad sometimes, but also being appropriately unserious and kind of jokey as well. So that'll be my spin.
Yeah, and then you get into psychological health through knowing myself, more or less. Even at the simplest level, it's like I've always had like great struggle not living under structure. Like I'm very orderly, and doing personality tests, I realized I was 99th percentile orderliness, which, by the way, I've realized nobody else on the internet is. If you Google like 99th percentile orderliness, fucking nothing comes up. Not even papers on it, because generally people in academia, and it seems to be people who just browse the web, aren't orderly. So it's like it's juxtaposed against my high openness. But it's like through introspection, I've realized my nature, and I can set up my life so that I remain in a place that is not unnecessarily suffering. It's like that's psychologically healthy.
Yep. It's good. Very, very potent question. We've so many more though. Okay, so Stefan needs to play some wolf tone. Oh fuck yeah! I'll do that.
The wolf tones.
Yes.
Yes, I do like it. My favorite album at the moment, by the way, is one of the old Wolf Tone guys singing American Confederate songs. It's the Confederate Irish, and one of the songs, the only recording on the internet, is about the Confederate hero Dick Dowling, and one of the lines is about the heroic Dowling. And every time that I listen to that song, I'm like, oh shit, he's singing about me.
Dick Dowling, get out of here! You fucking. That's so
That's the
funny.
guy I
Yeah,
hinted at earlier, either on or off air. I can't remember now because it's been gone fucking 2.5 hours. That
James.
I believe that I'm descended from.
James definitely grow his mustache anyway.
By the way, if you put that face on my face, it's the same face.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
It's also exactly the same face as my grandfather. Just saying.
I will drop that in the chat for anybody who's interested in. Just look up Dick Dowling. Dick Dowling. He has a statue. James, Jesus. The next comment, of course, will luckily bust this ridiculous ego. Your room is a dump.
I know.
That's from Mr. Cool Monk. He calls it syzygy, which is the unification of mind, body, and spirit. History isn't defined by a clean room either, motherfucker. And then it's the Luciferian comment. You should read Jung's essay on Hitler, or it might be an interview. Deutschland über alles in der Welt.
Of course, because it's your comment section.
What's that supposed to mean?
No, that's not even a comment. It's just, of course. Every comment section has to have something about Hitler. It's just like, oh, I've been waiting for that.
Jung's essay on Hitler. I'd actually love to read. I'd love to know what Jung thought of Hitler, because I know that Jung wasn't. I know that Jung wasn't. It wasn't as like outright. Like, you know, he's like, oh, he's just evil and crazy. Like, Jung actually dug into the man and really tried to understand him a lot, and produced quite an interesting profile on the guy, and really understood his place in the culture. And loads of people call them anti-Semitic because of it, because they're just dickheads and they always throw that fucking word around. And then Jung, apparently it came out recently that Jung was feeding psychological profiles on the high-level Nazis to the American state, to the FBI or the CIA, and he never told anybody about it, which is interesting. Or maybe it's treason, who knows? So like, it's interesting. It's interesting. Jordan Peterson is very Hitlerian. Jordolf Petler.
What? I can
Jordan
neither confirm nor deny my opinion on that comment.
Well, in many ways, like Jordan always says about Hitler, he's a very good public speaker who pays attention to the crowd and then says what the crowd wants to hear. And in many ways, that's actually exactly what Jordan does. Jordan speaks, notices what people likes, and then just says that over and over again.
Yes, he does. He doesn't say anything new ever. It's like, even when he says, I've seen him twice now, once in London, once in Manchester, and he says that he speaks like off the top of his mind. It's like, yeah, you do. That's my brother singing outside my door, so everyone's going to see this. But he doesn't come up with anything new, which is really interesting. And he says that he watches the audience, so that, and when they're silent, he knows he's doing something good. And when they're not silent, he's got to change a little bit. So yeah, in many ways, Jordan Peterson is like Hitler because he's a good speaker. But it's like, when you get down to the politics, I doubt it.
And you never know. Everyone clean. I was going to say clean the Jews, but I don't know about that. He got inspired by Wagner.
Who did?
That was Hitler. Hitler got inspired by Wagner.
Oh yes, as did Nietzsche, but Nietzsche broke from him.
Very Albionic. We are English by the grace of gods. Fionn McCool spoke English. Oh, Jesus Christ. We will build Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land.
Jerusalem. Yeah. About these dark satanic mills. Yes, a fellow Englishman, I appreciate you.
This is Mr. Coolmug. He's actually a real smart dude, and he's pretty cool. I like him. And he's got a cool name. I find it interesting from doing that little bit of research into the Irish myth. There's a juxtaposing narrative that the European people, specifically the Celts and the English, were sourced from Hyperborea up in the North Pole. It flows in with the flat Earth theory, and the idea is that they were Nordic, and there's a Nordic race at the North Pole that's getting hidden from us. and these Nordic people are, beautiful, live forever, like live 900 years like they did in the Bible, and that's the true center, that's the axis mundi of the world. And these people came out of the north and descended down into Ireland and England and brought with them from their four cities, interesting, like the marriage quaterno brought from their four cities the four treasures of Irish myth, which one of them was the Stone of Destiny. And what's interesting now is that that's the old Irish myth of where the Stone of Destiny came from, but modern English and Scots who are fighting over the Stone of Destiny say that it came from Jerusalem, and it's the pillow Jacob slept on because he slept on a stone. And so they've changed that narrative, which is really, really weird. And so the theory is that Christianity is a psyop in order to get people to focus on Jerusalem, which is like a hell world, and that instead the true base for the northern European people is the Hyperborea, which they eventually, everybody gets this desire to go back north, and then they go up north and they get accepted into Hyperborean land, and then they live there forever. Make of that what you will, but I think that's interesting. Nonetheless, we could build Jerusalem in England just to balance it all out around Stonehenge. That's a nice middle ground, and unify everyone.
Yes, we definitely could. You mentioned marriage quaternio again. So if people can see the cross that's around my neck of a pious Christian man. You have one, 2, 3, 4. So above and below the two arms, that's the 4 quarters. It's the same idea. It's reflected in the Christian symbol.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, the cross is awesome. I'm seeing a lot of those fucking rappers nowadays with upside down crosses. It's so naughty, so Luciferian. You fuckers should watch out. Don't know what you're fucking conjuring. And this is about Ben Shapiro from Mr. Coolmug again. Little Benny is a pleb. They should rename the Benny Hill theme the Benny Shill theme and play every time Benny Shapiro walks into a debate. And this is just laughing at me. It's like, I access the goddess all the time. Wink. So yeah.
Brilliant. I'm sure Mr. Cool Monkey does access Megan Fox all the time.
Wee Baboo got a message retracted. I wonder what that was about.
Yeah.
George Galloway is a great demagogue, and I use that term admiringly. What you make of George Galloway?
No opinion currently.
Okay. I actually don't know him too well. I think he's either anti-Muslim or anti-Israel. I don't know which. I think he's anti-Israel.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough to comment in good faith. Well, what I will say though, to sort of bust that up, is can everyone please tweet this at Megan Fox? I'd really appreciate that. If we can get her to recognize us chisel jawed boyos, I'd appreciate that.
Awesome. George Galloway, gender dysphoria is a mental. Oh, dude, there's so many of these. I'm just gonna have to read them. So we'll stop if we get a really a question. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness. Christianity used to be a Chad religion. I agree with that. Christianity isn't one religion; it's many different religions. A better term would be Christian faith. True. So, what you make of that? Christian faith, many religions.
So what that means, all the different denominations, I suppose.
Yeah.
So there's the C.S. Lewis idea, which is fascinating. It's the mere Christianity idea. It's like the whole point of mere Christianity is he deliberately sets out like a proof for Christianity away from all the other fluff. And there's an Oxford professor who wrote a book and created a series called The History of Christianity. I'd recommend it to people. It's on the BBC by Diarmid McCulloch. Just having a history of Christianity, BBC. And he walks you through it very nicely, where all the different types of Christianity came from. It's fascinating because not only did you obviously have the Catholic Church, and then you had Protestantism splitting from that, and then you had Protestantism splitting into different versions of that, and then them splitting depending basically on the country. It seemed to almost split, but across them there is a common theme. So yeah, and I almost think that if Christianity is going to have what's the word? I'm getting tired. If Christianity is going to come back in some form, it's going to be through the C.S. Lewis or Jordan Peterson form of Christianity. Well, I almost think that Jordan Peterson is going to want to become some kind of pastor to a more intellectual version of Christianity, but has at its core the same that's been across all Christianity for all time.
Oh, dude, like I'd again, our last talk, I'd worry about giving Jordan Peterson anything Christian, because you can't take that torch without.
Well, okay, imagine if Peterson decided he was going to set up a church in Canada, a big church. He was going to redo it up, and that every Sunday he was going to give a sermon. Because, by the way, that's what he said to one of his friends that he wanted
Yes,
to do.
this is what
How many people would go to that and become Christian?
Yeah, you're
from
right. You're right.
I'm not giving him
But
the
he's
credit.
he's not preaching Christianity. That's what I find weird about it. He's not like
He thinks he is.
Oh, dude, I don't know. He's confusing the fuck out of me right now because like it's pretty clear he's not. But I don't know. Look, I'll move on from that. Like, we did a whole talk in this. This is another jibe at you. He doesn't know whether or not he was under the influence of drugs or not.
Yeah, so I can actually clear that up. I not right now, but I live in Manchester, and I've actually had my drink spiked with MDMA, which is a mild hallucinogenic, by a dude before. Because I went into a pub and there was this guy who said, "Hey man, like, do you like Nigel Farage?" And I was like, "I love Nigel Farage." And so he just sat for like an hour talking, and he bought me a drink and he spiked the drink with MDMA because that's what people in Manchester and Salford do for fun. It's like even like the older guys, they do it as like a sign of I like you. Here you can relax. So it's like I've been for a couple pints before. Like I'm a fairly frequent drinker, so I don't have visions from God every day. It's like I was at the pub for a couple pints. There is a small possibility maybe that it was spiked, but I highly doubt it.
That's fucking mad.
Because my experience with being spiked that time was I just became really cuddly and really relaxed, whereas the other time was God came to me. It's like, well, that's quite different.
Jesus Christ. It makes sense. Yeah, that's so rootless. Like, I can't believe they get up to that. Wee Baboo says we need to give priests DMT and see what happens. And the closest I got to a transcendental experience was when I had an out of body experience while watching Lost in Translation, my favorite movie. Wow, that's pretty mad. The closest I have ever got to a transcendental experience is when I had an out of body experience while watching Lost in Translation.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Sammy says, just here to say that both of you are so interesting to listen to. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Sammy.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Sammy.
God's name isn't Jehovah, but I am. That's Weebaboo. That's awesome. Is James referring to Aryans?
Under what comment?
Aryan Christians, I believe.
No, I can't remember any in this talk thinking about Aryans. Was it my comment on Christian faith?
I just think it's that blonde hair and blue eyes of yours, my man.
Could be. I don't normally think in racial terms, really. I not that I have any particular opinions on it. It's just I generally don't.
Okay, sweet. Oh my God. He called himself the Son of Man because he couldn't call himself the Son of God because he'd be persecuted before his time. Can the novelties and prodigies of modernity and transhumanism fill the void left by godlessness? I think not. No. These comments are great. Christian transhumanism for the win.
Well, that would actually be a very interesting way to resolve the opposites, but I don't think that would work. Although maybe it would. Maybe that's what eternal life means. What Jesus talked about eternal life. Who knows?
As above, so below, as within, so without. A superficial view of the Kabbalion and, by extent, some of the New Age stuff is that we live through God, but we are not Him, into itself, only a part of. Is that true? Subjectively has been for me, but empirically, it's a tough cookie. Every truth becomes subjective once attained. Whoa, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's very interesting.
If you're orderly, then why is your bedroom a dump?
Right, that's the third comment on this. Because one, I've come home for the holidays. You should see my study back at back up in my normal house. Sorry, someone was just knocking at my damn door. We've been doing this for 3 hours. But my fiance's moved in with me, and this is a dog cage. So it's like, where else am I going to put my fiance's shit? This is all her shit. So just to clear that up again.
There's no need to clear it up. Look, James has a messy room. He has a clean mind, so definitely not a dirty mind. So
those two are actually impossible for me. I cannot detach the two.
Oh, here, did you got to bounce, my man?
Keep going.
Okay, cool. Just so in that sense, Christ, all the alchemy and fish stuff united the body with the divine and divine with the body. So this is a tough one. So every truth becomes subjective once attained, and then so I guess the divine with the body is that once you attain the divine truth, it can become subjective in your body, and that's sort of what Christ was. It's like what we were saying, the end goal of individuation.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that type of idea.
Let's breeze through these because we've been going for a very long time and I'm getting tired.
Jung said that the West should leave Hitler to go east into Russia. Jordan Peterson is exactly like Hitler. Look at Vox Day's videos and Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson reads his audience and reflects back in them what they want to. So that's what we were saying. We should take back the Arctic. We should colonize Antarctica. Galloway in all of his BBC interviews, he rips the living crap out of Israel. And this is Niall. He's just dropped in. I find it hard to understand that I myself, being attracted to men, I'm attracted to their masculinity as a masculine man, but in the content of relationship love, but have born like this. That's interesting. And then, this is
very interesting.
This is a big talk. Not all homosexuals are like, not all are genetically predisposed either. It's a very complicated issue. Peterson is a shill for globalism. Branch theology for the win. I like to see some element of vulnerability in men and women because realistically, we're all vulnerable to some extent. It is the conscious gravitation to femininity that confuses me. It's Niall giving sophisticated nuances into the homosexual experience.
Yeah. And the problem is you can't research it and you can't talk about it. So even me hypothesizing that there is a biological cause, or positive there's a biological cause for homosexuality, for some people in their projections, as we've been talking about, will immediately see that as, I want to get rid of homosexuals. It's like, clearly that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's like, but you can't talk about it. It'd just be interesting to know why this particular thing exists when it seems counter-evolutionary.
Yeah. People, I think we're going to have to call it there because someone wants to clean James's room, so we have to bounce. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks for all the comments. They were very, very interesting. This is a great feed as always, and we will be back, I believe, next Sunday with the damn self, which is just such an awesome topic. Thank you very much, people. Talk to you later.
Thank you, people. Love you all.
Bye-bye.